everybody. It is 6:01, so let's go ahead and open up the meeting of November 15th, 2022. And we will go ahead and start our meeting with a roll call.
Mayor Seaman?
Here.
Councilmember Burgell?
Here.
Councilmember Bauer?
Here.
Councilmember Arroyo?
Here.
Councilmember Moulton?
Here.
Councilmember Castellano?
Here.
All right. Will you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? All right. We did not have a closed session tonight, which has me feeling really weird. I keep saying we often have them before the meeting, and so we had to come here at 6, and now it feels so late at night. So we'll move on to the mayor's announcements, and we have Councilmember Burgell is going to read the National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Proclamation.
Thank you. Is there someone here to receive this proclamation? Nezzy, do you want to come on up? Thank you. So, City of Eureka Proclamation in recognition of National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week, November 12th through 20th, 2022. Whereas the theme of National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week 2022 is being homeless is not a crime and housing is a human right. And whereas people from all walks of life, including individuals, families, and children, employed and unemployed workers, elderly residents, veterans, disabled individuals, and youth are impacted by hunger and homelessness. And whereas the community recognizes that hunger and homelessness continues to be a serious problem for many individuals and families living in Eureka, and no one should have to worry about whether they will have food on their plate or a roof over their head. And whereas the California Center for Rural Policy reported in their Humboldt County Food Assessment that hunger is a daily experience and that more than 31% of individuals experience food insecurity, while 37% of households with children experience food insecurity. Most live on fixed incomes or survive paycheck to paycheck. And whereas while homelessness creates barriers to accessing essential services, such as affordable health care, housing, childcare, and education, the cost of these necessities often contribute to hunger, food insecurity, and people experiencing homelessness on any given night. And whereas the aim of the National Coalition for the Homeless is to eradicate homelessness by solving the root causes of it, to educate the public about the many reasons people are hungry and homeless, including the shortage of affordable housing for low-income residents, and to encourage support for the organizations committed to sheltering, providing support services, as well as meals, food, supplies, clothing, and hygiene products to the homeless and hungry. And now, therefore, I, Kim Burgell, on behalf of the Eureka City Council, do hereby proclaim that November 12th to 20th, 2022 is National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week and encourages all people in our community to work together to find meaningful solutions for these problems.
May we speak?
Of course. Please do.
Thank you very much, Council, Mayor, City staff, community. My name is Nezzy Wade, and I'm a representative of Affordable Homeless Housing Alternatives. And for the last several years, we've been the organization that has asked the cities, the municipalities, and the county to come forward and bring a proclamation to us as a community so that we can focus our awareness on hunger and homelessness at a time when it's a period of bounty for most people. It's the Thanksgiving, the holiday season, and there are many, many people who will never touch the level of hunger and homelessness that are in our midst every day. So one of the issues the proclamation mentions is essentially the contributing factors. And one of the greatest factors for homelessness and hunger is a lack of housing. And AHA's been working for years at creating alternatives, working on public policy that makes that possible by getting opportunities in our housing elements to have alternatives. But the municipalities, the county, could do this at any time they want to, but we focus on safe parking, sanctioned camping, campgrounds essentially, and tiny home or micro house villages. There are many people in our communities now that really like these ideas and would like to implement them. It's up to the cities and to the political subdivisions to decide how they're going to do that. But know that there are people out here, organizations, numbers of them, besides us, who would like to work on alternatives and collaborate with the city and others as partners to do these kinds of things. It's not going to be possible for people to have a place to lay their heads, put their possessions, have showers, meals, access to services until we allow them some level of stability, which we do not now allow with our tactics for how we manage people who live outside. So be encouraged, work with us, work with everybody who wants to improve our situations around hunger and homelessness in the city as well as the county. So thank you.
Thank you, Nezzy.
Hi, I'm Tiffany LaFoon. I have been working for AHA as a community outreach worker since April. And I have also been homeless myself a number of times in Humboldt County. And now that the cold months are here and it's pretty miserable outside and it gets pretty dangerous for a lot of people, I'm facing another year where I can expect that I'm going to lose some of my friends to the elements or to the other dangers that are out there. And I just ask that you do whatever is in your power to make it so that people can survive, because it's going to be a long time before most people will be able to get into housing. And so we need transitional models that allow people to be safe, allow them to stay with their communities, and have some semblance of stability so that they can get on their feet instead of having to wait for years to get into housing through one of these programs. And I also have recently become the representative of a newly formed group called HEAL, Homeless Expertise and Leadership. We sit in the executive committee of the HHHC, and we would like to invite you to contact us if you would like to hear from us about what it's like to be homeless here and what challenges we face and also solutions that we have in mind. So you can contact us at Humboldt, HEAL, @gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, just have a couple of things to mention. Over the past 2 weeks, we had an election, so congratulations to Councilmembers Castellano and to Mayor-elect Kimbergal. And also, thank you to everybody who has gone out and voted, because we have 2 positions that we are still waiting for with fewer than 30 votes difference right now. So it's just always, especially in a small community, you really get to see where your vote counts. So everybody who took the time to get their ballots in, thank you very much. I also went to the Recology open house this weekend. That's always a really educational experience to see the recycling center, get a tour. I was super impressed with how many people were there. It looked like every tour was filling up, and people were running through day and night. They were very excited to be making corn dogs. We had some local volunteers. I only mentioned that because they were very, very excited to have corn dogs. and chili and cones. But so they were zero waste snacks. I think one of the true hidden jewels in Humboldt County is the recycling art museum that they have at Recology, which is not, they took a lot of it down so that they can make room for the event the other day. But if you ever have a chance to get out there, I highly recommend it. And also pay attention to what you're recycling. And if you don't know what goes in there, you can find it online so that we can minimize their wasted recycling products. I also got to go to the grand opening of the visitor center, which was fabulous. We have a penny press people are very excited about, including my husband, who was a big advocate for getting that in there. He's got them from all over the country. He thought it was a really big deal. And just a little mention that the Chinatown project has gotten some incredible exposure in the last few days. So congratulations to Brianne and everybody who has been working on that project for doing the work and making a lot of progress and really telling the important story of what happened during the Chinese expulsion in Eureka. And that will do it for my mayor's report. And we will move on. And this is going to be fun, so I'm going to read all the things that we don't have on our calendar today. Presentations, none. Board of Commissions report, none. Public comment period. This is the time where the public is allowed to speak. We have 3 minutes, and if you would like to speak on a non-agenda item, we would like to invite you up at this time. Do we have, okay, come on up.
Hi, my name is Pat, and I think this is an agenda item. It's about the water rate increase.
Yeah, that's an
So,
agenda
yeah.
item.
Yeah, then I guess I can't talk about it.
Sorry. Yes.
I'm just coming back for what I think probably everyone already knows is that the AHA Caravan, the mobile shower program, is ending at the end of this year in December. And we are very sad about that. It's a very hard thing to do because it's been a wonderful experience for so many that we serve in so many communities and the opportunity for people to participate. It's a beloved project, and we are not continuing that project so that we can put our resources and all of our efforts into actually creating some alternatives that will allow people stable places to be, because we have a policy now with Housing First and our plans to implement these things that have resulted in the gap that never gets filled. Our low-income housing projects are too expensive for most people to live in, and the shelters are non-existent. So what we end up with is this gap that a lot of people fall into, and it won't be addressed until we do something to create alternative spaces that people can stabilize in and be able to access the things that are needed. So while the showers have always scored the fact that people don't have what they need, we have to do something much better, because we saw in our services in the last several months, last 4 to 6 months, with the displacement people were experiencing in housing, that our service population nearly doubled in every place we were providing services. Every community really needs to have some alternatives to get people stable and to make it possible for people to continue to live. So I know this sounds really terrible, but it's really the truth. We have a policy, by not doing this, of slow genocide. And we lose 3 people a month to the street, and it's just stark, especially now with all of the issues around substance use and fentanyl and everything else. Last year, 27 people that we have personal loving relationships with died related on the streets. And when it's that significant, we'll know there'll be more this year. So we just... we'd love to be able to do both, but we can't because we are small and we don't have a lot of capacity. But we're going to build that capacity. So work with us, help us build that capacity. We need people who are interested in being board members and committee members and working with us in a way that will actually foster these things. They're plausible and possible now, so we need to just keep moving in that direction. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment in the building? And if not, I will turn to Zoom and say, is there anybody for public comment on Zoom? All right.
Just raise your hand if you're on Zoom for public comment. Or
It looks like
no public comment.
people are here for a reason, so we'll move on so we can get to that. I will close public comment. We don't have any public hearings. We do have the consent calendar. I did not hear of anybody wanting to pull anything. Am I mistaken that? We're all good? Can I have a motion, please, then, to approve the
So moved.
Thank you.
A second.
Thank you. Everybody vote, please.
Unanimous vote, motion carries.
What about Councilmember Arroyo?
And Natalie.
I
Sorry.
That would have been
predicted correctly.
It would have been thrilling if you said no, though. All right. Does anybody have, we're going to move on to legislative action correspondence. Does anybody have anything that needs to be written before the next meeting of urgent nature? All right. Then we will move on to ordinances and resolutions. And we have item H1, which is the water revenue refunding bonds, Series 2022, and we are going to pull the wastewater revenue refunding bonds, right? A city attorney, Luna, we're pulling the wastewater revenue refunding bonds, right?
That's correct. Only the water will be heard tonight. The water bond refunding will be heard tonight.
Excellent. And I do believe that Deputy Public Works Director Brian Issa is here to speak on that one.
It's Director Lane Millar.
Oh, sorry. Director Millar.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council. I will share my screen. So the original title was the Water Revenue Refunding Bonds Series 2022 and Wastewater Revenue Refunding Bonds Series 2022. The reason for the proposed change was that just this week we were offered a lower interest rate on the wastewater debt. So in order to take advantage of the lower rate, we will need to update the agreements and the documents associated with that transaction. So that will come back to council at the first meeting in December. So essentially my recommendation is it just eliminates any reference to the wastewater refunding bonds. And then the attachments that came with the agenda item, the resolution, the indenture, and the placement agent agreement associated with the wastewater debt will be removed, and you will be approving the ones associated with the water fund. So my new title tonight is the Water Revenue Refunding Bonds, Series 2022. So some background. The water fund has 4 active debt obligations. This includes a 2002 bond, a 2005 bond, 2006, and the 2012 water bonds. Summary of this debt. We have a total amount outstanding of about 12.4 million. And then the average interest cost among the obligations is about 4.87%. On October 18th, the Eureka City Council adopted a resolution that appointed a financing team. This team included our municipal advisors, PFM Financial Advisors, our bond counsel, Oric, Harrington, and Sutcliffe, and then our placement agent, Brandis Tallman. It also authorized staff to approve a term sheet from the preferred bank or financial institution. So we released an RFP, or a request for proposals. That period ended on October 26th. We received 7 offers from various banks for the water debt. The interest rate on these offers ranged from 4.7 to 5.4%. And ultimately, the team selected Signature Bank at a rate of 4.7%. So in conclusion, staff recommends proceeding with the water revenue refunding bonds, Series 2022, for the following reasons. The transaction will result in approximately $144,000 in cash savings to the water fund, with a present value of $182,000. It will also reduce the administrative burden by consolidating 4 debt obligations into one. So here I have that revised recommendation.
Thank you very much, Director Millar. Do we have any questions here from council? And I cannot hear you, Councilmember Arroyo. If you have a question, you just speak up.
I will. I do not have a question at this time. Thank you.
All righty. Then I will go ahead and open this up to public comment. Is there anybody who has public comment on this item about the bonds? Is there anybody online who has a public comment on this item about the bonds? Doesn't look like it. All right, so I will close public comment and bring it back for discussion or motion. Councilmember Brielle or Castellano? Arm wrestle? Okay.
So I move we adopt the attached resolution of the City of Eureka approving the issuance of the water revenue refunding bonds, Series 2022, in order to refund certain outstanding obligations of the City of Eureka, approve the execution and delivery of an indenture of trust, placement, agent agreement, and other documents relating thereto, and providing for other matters properly relating to the water revenue refunding bonds, Series 2022.
I'll second.
Nicely done. Any further discussion on this item? All right, then everybody can vote.
Aye.
Thank you.
Unanimous vote, motion carries.
All right, so moving on to item H2. This one is for Deputy Public Works Director Brian Issa, and this is the private sewer lateral ordinance revisions. Item H2.
Years in, you think I know how to run Zoom. So tonight we're going to talk about the update to the sewer lateral ordinance, and the Zoom thing goes away. Okay, let's make sure if I get close enough that everybody can hear me. So the lateral ordinance was adopted a couple of years back. If you remember, it was brought to council with a point of sale trigger initially, which was passed by council, and eventually it was vetoed by the mayor due to opposition to the point of sale trigger, essentially. We later brought it back without a point of sale trigger, adopted it, and have been using that ordinance over the last couple of years. So this update really was spawned out of some mechanical issues with the ordinance in terms of actually implementing it with homeowners and some of the confusion that it causes, as well as conversations with the Humboldt Association of Realtors and a desire on the part of some of the realtors in the area to actually see a point of sale ordinance as an effort to add more certainty to the ordinance and take out some of the ambiguity. So a little bit of background on why we're focusing on sewer laterals in general. Again, just for everybody, the sewer lateral is the piece of sewer pipe that connects the house to the main in the street. So it's generally 4 inches. It's broken into two parts called the upper lateral, which is the part from the house to the property line, and the lower lateral, which is from the property line to the main in the street. So at this point, we are required by a couple of lawsuit settlements, a consent decree, and a CDO to reduce I&I into the system. Again, that's inflow and infiltration into the system. So that's stormwater that is entering into the system. The reason that's a problem is because we end up having to treat all of that water. So the more we can keep that out of the system, the lower our treatment costs are. There's been some changes to the way the EPA and the State Water Board deal with the practice of blending. It's a bit long and complicated, but essentially now we're required to treat every drop of wastewater, whereas before we had an opportunity to sort of shunt parts of that during high flows where it's mostly dilute, it's mostly water, around a certain part of the treatment process and blend it on the back end. That's no longer allowed. It's not just us, there are treatment plants all over the country that are in the same boat. So those were some of the changes that happened with our discharge permits. We also did some projects in the past to try to figure out where the I&I was really coming from. We did the Third and Y basin, where we went in and lined the majority of the large pipe, the sewer mains in the basin. And what we found is we got a much lower benefit than we anticipated. We didn't keep as much water out as we thought we would by lining all of those pipes, and the project cost quite a bit more than we anticipated. So what that kind of told us was most of the water is not coming from the mains, it's coming from the laterals, whether it's downspouts that are piped into the system or just inflow and infiltration through all of those old clay pipes that are in short sections and allow a lot of water to come in. So adopting the lateral ordinance was really a way to move some of the cost of fighting I&I, which we're required to do, out of the public sphere and to the homeowners, because the costs are very significant. And we're having to do those both at the treatment end of things, of treating more water, because we're required to do that now, as well as dealing with keeping water out of the system. So we're kind of fighting it on both ends, both at the treatment end and on the collections end. So some of the thinking behind that was that laterals do serve typically a single property, that they don't carry what's generally thought of as a public benefit. They're not like a sewer main where they carry, multiple houses or several blocks of houses. The benefit of a sewer lateral accrues to one property only. It helps avoid some additional rate increases, which we'll talk more about rates in a bit, but during the last round of rate increases, the sewer rates went up 100% and are projected to go up more in the next 5 years. So it was a way to move some of those rate increases instead of being built into the rates where everybody's paying for it. Some of that is going to be borne by the people who accrue the benefit of having that sewer lateral. And then a lot of it just came down to the logistics of not having the capacity to replace laterals, especially, we'll talk about the point of sale trigger, but at the rate that sewer laterals need to be replaced, our crews we just don't have the capacity to go out and replace all those laterals. So the current lateral ordinance did come before council in 2018. It was vetoed, came back in 2019 without the point of sale trigger, and it moved that lower lateral really from the public to the private sphere. So the city had maintained and replaced the lower laterals up until that point. It took those lower laterals and sort of took them out of the public sphere and made them private. That's not uncommon. Cities are kind of all over the map with it, about 50-50 in terms of whether the city takes responsibility for the lower lateral or not. And it made replacement of clay laterals mandatory when certain triggering events occurred. So the current triggers in the ordinance are building permit valuations over 50,000, adding a unit, so the construction of ADUs, adding 2 or more drainage fixture units in a 3-year period. So if you add bathrooms, things like that, a change of use that increases flow or strength. So like a conversion from a residence to some sort of commercial use, or from an office to a restaurant, something like that. Subdivisions, if the city's replacing the main or if the lines are broken. So we're averaging about 100 lateral inspections per year right now through our vendor called Forward Lateral. So the plumbers do the CCTV inspections. They submit them through the Forward Lateral website. We review them. If the lateral is substandard, which really means if the lateral's clay, so all the clay pipes are considered to be beyond their design life and substandard, and that's a condition of some of the litigation. Those all have to be replaced, regardless of whether the pipe is still in fairly good condition from a flow standpoint. If it's clay, it has to be replaced. There are cross connections all over Eureka. So probably, just estimating, at least 25% of the time, maybe more, when somebody runs CCTV on their lateral, they find out that they're actually joined at the hip to their neighbor. And you can imagine all the situations there, how that might work out or might not work out. But it makes it very complicated when one person has triggered the ordinances being told you have to replace your lateral. Now their neighbor gets drug into the situation. They have to replace their lateral too, because there's not 2 laterals. They join together at the property line and flow out through one lateral, which is not allowed in current building code. But it just makes it very complicated to move that forward to a resolution and get things replaced. Requires significant staff time to review, coordinate, and assist owners through that process. It is quite cumbersome. And the biggest problem right now, at least from a staff side, is the need for a Class A contractor to get involved. So a plumber can do the work from the house to the property line. Because of the insurance requirements of working in the right-of-way, where you're doing traffic control and blocking sidewalks and things like that, work in the right-of-way requires a Class A contractor that carries bigger insurance. And there's only a handful of them in the area, and they don't typically do homeowner type work. They're the bigger, the Mercer Frasers and the Wallens. They're the folks that do our projects. So they're not really available to do a lot of that work, and when they are, they're quite costly. And just the cost and expense of digging in the street, patching the street, that's a big expense for the homeowner. But just coordinating that process, and the fact that there's 2 separate permits, a building permit for the upper, an engineering permit for the lower, 2 different contractors, and trying to convey that all to a homeowner who all they know is they never thought about sewer ever until the poop started coming out of the tub, and that just becomes a not very tenable situation. So we do have a lateral loan program where the city has been assisting with the costs of replacing the lateral. That applies to both the upper and the lower. It's currently a 2.5% interest rate, 10,000 max, and a 10-year term. With the recent cost increases, there are times where that's not covering the costs. I've seen lower laterals through the Class A contractors as high as 27. Now that was a fairly long lateral, and it very much depends on retaining walls and what's in the way and the depth and all of those sorts of things. But combined upper and lower lateral, some instances 10,000 is not covering it. We've also done what's called an annual aggregate project, where we basically tell folks, okay, you have to replace your lateral, but the lower, we understand it's a big cost. What we'll do is we'll put your name on a list, and then when we get enough of them together, we'll bid it as a city project, the hope being that we get some economy of scale, and that maybe by bidding a whole bunch of them, we could pull a contractor from out of the area that can do pipe lining, or maybe we already have a contractor in the area doing main work that we can sort of tack that onto their project and get a better cost than the homeowners would get going individually to a contractor on their own. We did that once. It did yield some benefits, so that model does seem to work. But it does require a lot of coordination and getting everything squared away and making sure that everything gets paid at the end when it's all done. So we talked about the Class A contractors, the 2 permits. These are kind of the main pain points that I mentioned. The cross connections is one that comes up all the time. Tracking the whole thing is very consuming of staff time. It's a pretty heavy burden, and it's not really consolidated with any one person. I do quite a bit of it. Engineering does some of it, and it's kind of spread around, but it doesn't provide a very efficient customer service point. It would be better for the customer to have a single point of contact where they can ask questions and get updates on where they're at. And there's quite a lot of uncertainty in the costs and the timing of the project, especially when you get into the lower lateral in the street. So what we heard from the community, both people who were engaged in this process, the realtors and other representatives, was it's too complex. There's too many moving parts. There's multiple permits, multiple contractors, and it's really overwhelming for a lot of the homeowners. There's quite a bit of uncertainty. Once you pull in the need for the Class A contractor, some of those jobs could be 6 months out before anybody's even available to do the work, and their stuff might be broken right now. So that becomes a problem. It just injects a lot of delay and uncertainty around timing and costs of that project. It's in some instances, it's almost working as a point of sale trigger right now because the realtors have caught on to the fact that this is a requirement. Homeowners have caught on to the fact that this is a requirement. So we are starting to see people sort of doing CCTV camera inspections as part of the disclosure process, just like you'd get an inspection on a roof or a foundation or anything else you were concerned about in a sale. And then they kind of work it out between the buyer and the seller. So that's kind of already de facto working that way. And there's a lack of consistency. And this is something we did here, especially in meetings with the Humboldt Area Association of Realtors, was that Arcata has a sewer lateral ordinance and they do it differently than we do it. And realtors don't just sell houses in Arcata or Eureka, they work all over the place. And so there was a desire to try to increase the consistency between the two ordinances and the way that things work so that we're not all over the map. So, and just to talk a little bit about that back and forth process, the city manager and myself did meet with the Humboldt Association of Realtors, and they had some really good feedback, and we actually took that into account, crafted an ordinance, sent it back to them, got some changes, went back and forth, as well as with a couple of other realtors who were not part of the association. We had some back and forth, and they had some really good comments, and it was very constructive to have people read the language. I always fear that we're sort of crafting code in a vacuum, and then when you adopt it, it's like then you figure out what's wrong with it. So it's been a very good process. So the proposed changes tonight are to add a point of sale trigger. So it would be a requirement in addition to those other requirements of building permits and other things. Selling a property would trigger CCTV inspection of the lateral and replacement if it is clay or if it is other, degraded in some other manner. It would create a set fee payable to the city for replacement of the lower lateral. So rather than having the homeowner telling them they have to replace the lateral, go find a contractor and figure it out, just pay a set fee. You're out of the loop. Like, we'll take that money, we'll hire a contractor when we get enough of them put together that we get that economy of scale, we'll manage the project, we'll deal with all the contractor bidding and all of that sort of stuff. And once you pay the fee, you're sort of off the hook. That fee, then the sale can proceed immediately. So there's not this interim period where you're waiting to see if the contractor can get on the job, how much it's going to cost. You're already in escrow trying to figure all this out on the fly. You pay the fee to the city, sale proceeds, and everybody's, I won't say happy, but at least the sale's moving along. It's not being impeded by the city's process. That fee would be based on what the city is seeing as bids from contractors for various types of lateral replacement. So when we do larger projects, we have what's called dig and replace, which is just what it sounds like. They're going to dig up the main, rebed the pipe, and put new pipe in the ground. That's the most expensive way to do it because you're digging up, tearing up the street, going through everything, avoiding the gas lines, and it's a large project. You can also do what's called burst and pull, which is where they pull new pipe inside the old pipe and just split it apart, and you don't have to dig up a whole bunch. And you can also do pipe lining, which is like a fiberglass sock. They inflate it into the pipe, screed it with epoxy, and it cures inside the pipe, makes new pipe inside the old pipe. So bidding those projects, we can take advantage of those types of trenchless technologies that some of the contractors in the area don't necessarily have. And that fee can be based on the bids that we're seeing from contractors for those different types of projects. So a dig and replace might be $12,000 and a cast in place pipe lining might be $4,500. So the average cost in there right now, as I'm seeing it, is somewhere around $8,000 with an additional amount for administration of the city bidding the project and inspecting and managing the project. So probably somewhere on the order of $8,500. That's not going to be stated in the code. That's something that will be adopted as part of the fee schedule. So if you're looking for that number in the code, which I know a lot of the realtors were upset that the number's not in the code, but it's better to have it in the fee schedule in case it needs to change. Could go up, could go down, but it's better to not have it in the code. We'd also propose to increase the maximum loan amount. That would kind of be up to the council's discretion, and we can talk a little more about that. And that's also not stated in the code. The loan amount and the specifics of the loans are not stated in the code itself, and that's on purpose because loan terms change, interest rates change, the ability of the city to fund those through sewer funds may change. So it's better to not have that in the code. We just say that the city can adopt a program to provide loans for people to replace sewer laterals, and the language is very generic. We also proposed to create a staff position to provide a single point of contact. So when I went through and got sales numbers from the association for the number of home sales in Eureka, total with building permit triggers, and it's totally dependent on the environment, but building permit triggers, everything that we've got going now, plus a point of sale, we could be seeing 400 to 500 lateral replacements in a year. That is orders of magnitude more than I can handle. And I think for everyone concerned, it would be better to have one single point of contact and creating a staff position who is that single point of contact. It actually worked out to 1.4 FTE when I ran the spreadsheet of how much time it was going to take. That includes managing the loan program, drafting documents, deeds to secure the city's loans, reviewing CCTV, hand-holding homeowners, dealing with plumbers, going through the whole process from soup to nuts to make sure that there's one point of contact who knows what's going on. I think that'll be better for everybody involved. So that's kind of the broad overview of what the changes are. Take any questions you might have.
Could I just clarify that you mentioned a couple times that the mayor vetoed the point of sale, and that was the prior mayor?
Not this mayor.
I don't want to take credit for anything I didn't do. And also, I will ask if anybody else, Councilmember Moulton.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. I was very succinct. Actually, just one question I was curious about. Is there any difference besides digging under the street? Is there any difference in the actual pipe between the upper and lower laterals? It's the same thing all the way across. It's just a matter of where it crosses the property line makes the difference.
Generally, it's the same pipe. Correct.
So somebody could definitely do the whole length of it.
Yeah, usually the homeowner will do from the house. Even the homeowner can do it as owner builder with a building permit, or they can hire a plumber. Any licensed plumber can do the upper. They're generally much more shallow. They're not as deep. It usually goes out to the property line and then dives to the main. The mains are a little more constrained in terms of where we're trying to get the sewer to. So in some places in town, they're 10 feet deep. But the pipe composition is the same.
Okay. And you mentioned that we don't have anyone around here that happens to do the trenchless replacements. Boy, that's a good business idea, huh? Anybody all could come in and start a business that did that sort of thing. Would a person need to be, or would a business need to be a Class A contractor if they were doing trenchless?
You're still working in the right of way, yeah. And we do have contractors that can do what's called burst and pull, where they actually run a cable through the pipe, pull a cutter head through the pipe that splits the pipe open and pulls fused HDPE pipe behind it. But the pipe lining, it's a very complicated. You're dealing with mixed resins, epoxies in large volumes, and robots that go underground and do all kinds of crazy stuff. It's a very specialty construction type thing. So we don't have anybody around here that does that.
Okay. But here's a great business opportunity. All right. That's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? Councilmember Bauer.
I just had a question about the cross connection. So are we saying that let's say if I want to I had to replace my lateral and I'm connected to my neighbor, does the neighbor is going to be required to do theirs at the time of my point of sale?
And Correct. Well, not at the time of your point of sale. So they would have to, because they're not selling their property, the point of sale has to be done before the sale, but the other person would have to be done within a year.
Okay.
Typically how I've been dealing with cross connections, just in an effort to fix the problem, it doesn't, because our crew will do new installs. Like if you call and you're building a new house on a vacant lot and you need a sewer install, we will do the new install because you have to tap the main, and we don't want anybody working on our, generally it's better for us to work on our infrastructure. It doesn't make any sense for us to go and install a new lateral and 5 feet away have a bad lateral in the ground and require that homeowner to go get somebody to come and fix it. We'll just offer to do it at the same cost as a new install. So that's usually been enough to get people on board. It's like, well, you can pay us to do it now and put both pipes in the same trench for $3,500, or you can go get somebody to do it for 10 grand. That's almost always enough to get people like, oh yeah, let's do it now. But there's all sorts of neighbors and all sorts of relationships that make that difficult in certain situations.
Councilmember Moulton.
Question about the financing. You mentioned a 2.5% and a 10K max, and you were proposing to increase that to cover the actual cost as costs increase. Would the interest rate then stay the same in the term?
That would depend entirely. The term could go longer, and the interest rate would vary based on. The original idea was to set it based on the interest rate that the city would have got if the city had that money invested somewhere else. That's a question I would leave up to the finance director and city manager to address.
That is our intention, to keep it that way. So if we end up not making, if we had a worse interest rate on what we were making on our cash, then it could change, or a better interest rate, whatever it may be. But typically it's around that area there, 2.5 to 3%.
The idea here is to cover the cost. This isn't something, it's like not a money-making venture for the city.
Yeah, basically if we kept that cash in the bank, we'd earn that amount.
Okay.
So.
And how easy is it to get one of those loans? Sorry, the last question.
Super easy.
Super easy.
There's no
credit check. There's no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Basically, you just have to put it in your deed that you're gonna repay us.
Yeah.
Okay.
You fill out a form, you send it to me. Generally, it has the amount that it's going to cost. It can include the upper and the lower. We craft a deed restriction, a lien on the property for the amount. You sign and notarize the paperwork, and we're off and running.
Okay, thank you.
So following up on her question, after you've looked at some of these things to sort of help with it, we are looking at the costs going down. You're talking about kind of an $8,500 flat rate. So we wouldn't really need to increase. I mean, we could, but the loan amount probably wouldn't need to be increased.
If the $8,500 for the lower is the fee that we settle on, uppers generally run 25 to 5, somewhere in there, depending on what's in the way and how long it is. So, if
2,500.
yeah, sorry.
So
If you can get it done for $25, do it for sure.
I thought you meant 25,000 for a second.
that is thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. The other question I had was, one of the concerns was that it was inconsistent with Arcata's policy. Mm-hmm. What were some of the ways that it was inconsistent, and how did we either bring them to consistency, or were we not able to?
The point of sale was a big one, because they do have a point of sale trigger. So we copied their language pretty much verbatim for the point of sale. The building permit trigger is different, but ours is actually higher. Theirs is 30,000. Ours is 50,000 because of the cost of construction. We felt like keeping ours at 50,000 was worth having the inconsistency, and nobody has thus far complained about it. So we'll leave that there. There's still going to be some inconsistency with Arcata's, because their fee is much lower, and like their fee is actually lower than ours for a new install. They're losing money, I guarantee it. And they take control of the lateral once it's in. So they say, well, you replace it. Once you replace it, the city will take on that maintenance burden forever and ever. Functionally, as the sewer crew, it doesn't really matter. Once it's plastic and it's all brand new, you're never going to look at it again for 100 years. Like it's not, whether the city takes control of it or the homeowner takes control of it, it's kind of a wash.
Thanks. Councilmember Moulton.
It seems like the difference between the city taking control and the owner having control makes a difference to homeowners, even if, like, arguably it's not actually going to come under any cost, or it's not going to make a difference financially. Is there a reason we wouldn't change our ordinance to be that way?
The only real difference that I see is that when it plugs, the plug would be on the homeowner to go and get a plumber to unplug it versus calling the city's crew. The reality of it is, if it's plugged below the clean out, it's going to flow out of the clean out, which means when we get the call is going to be there's sewer coming out of the clean out in the sidewalk and flowing into the gutter. They're not going to call a plumber. They're going to call us, and we're going to respond, and we have to respond by state law. We have to respond to an SSO. We can't allow it to reach surface waters. And if we do, it's a big deal. So when we show up and there's sewer coming out of the clean out, we're going to fix the problem. So it's, in reality, we're sort of maintaining the lowers anyway.
And SSO is sanitary sewer overflow.
Thank you,
Councilmember Moulton.
I appreciate that. And then
Find it. Oh, I'm sorry.
the alphabet soup. It's it's a wall against
I was a planner
understanding.
for years, so it's second nature.
I know.
So
Yeah, I say coda and te all day long. Nobody knows what the hell I'm talking about. So then when that happened, then the homeowner would be dealing with the city or dealing once again with the Class A contractor. Then am I understanding that right? If the city took control of it, or if the city, no, wait, you understood my question. He's going to answer it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Deputy Public Works Director Issa was trying to get at is that when it does clog, it ends up being a sanitary sewer overflow. And whether it was their responsibility or ours, we're likely going to be responding. Well, we're definitely going to be responding a lot quicker to that because it's we'll have to take care of that. So any SSO, whether it comes from our main or comes from a clean out and it's going into the street, we have to take care of it. It happened on, Hodgson about a month ago.
yeah.
So something similar to that
pretty
happened,
often.
and our staff was out there taking care of it. I believe Councilmember Bauer was aware of that.
So I guess I'm trying to understand. Currently, the homeowner is responsible for the lateral from the house to the main, all the way, upper and lower. But the city is taking care of it anyway. And you're saying there's not a difference once it's replaced. Nobody's going to have to look at it for a while. But I feel like homeowners feel like there is a difference then even after it has been replaced, that whether the city is responsible for it or the homeowner is responsible for it, they care. I care. Is there any reason we couldn't come more in line with what Arcata does and take responsibility for the laterals once they are replaced with the contractor that we hire, since our crews would be the ones going out and taking care of it anyway?
If council chose to go in that direction, we could. I would rely on Deputy Public Works Director Issa and Public Works Director Gerving on whether or not there would be, what I could see being a problem is if there was a maintenance burden related to this, that it would affect what we'll talk about later, but rates and our staffing levels and our operations and maintenance of the system. And what I'm hearing from Deputy Public Works Director Issa is that it wouldn't be a maintenance issue. So if that's the case and council chose to do that, it would be council's discretion if they wanted to change it to once replaced, the city's owns it.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't have any opposition to the city taking over the maintenance of the lower lateral once it's replaced with plastic. From a sewer crew standpoint, I don't see any functional reason why that would matter. Sometimes we respond to SSOs that are clearly somebody putting stuff down the drain that they should not have. In those cases, we will bill them for that response. But I think we have another mechanism to do that anyway, even if we weren't maintaining the lower lateral.
One more. Sorry. Would there be an administrative burden then, having basically a certain category of lower laterals in the city that were the city's responsibility and a certain category that were the homeowner's responsibility, and now there's this separation? Even if the homeowner, say, gets that work done themselves and now but that's on them. And
it would be consistent with Arcata's ordinance. That's basically how they're doing it now. So they kind of break it based on the presence of a clean out. So the old lines don't have a clean out. That's kind of how you tell if it's been replaced, is whether or not it has a clean out. So once their condition is, once it has a clean out, city takes it.
interesting. Thank you.
Just going to ask if she had any questions, even though I can't see her.
Hi.
Hi.
I was having some tech glitches. I apologize. So if this was already covered, just feel free to tell me. I wanted to be sure I understood. So in the past, we've talked about having a loan where people were billed on their sewer bill each month, and now it sounds like we're talking about a lien instead against the property. Could you clarify what your intention is, or if those are similar approaches to the same thing? It sounds like a loan agreement might be a little bit less onerous for some folks, but I'm not sure.
So we did originally talk about the loan program and the payments for the loan being attached to the water sewer billing. That did not roll out that way, just due to the logistics of the billing system and entering loans within the context of our billing software. And so people have been getting that loan servicing separate from their water and sewer bill. So it still requires some sort of deed restriction lien to secure that debt. And, the amortization schedules and everything are all held outside of the billing system. So it wouldn't be any real difference from what is happening now.
So it's a separate bill that people are paying independent of their water and sewer bill.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And then on the, I'll hold my other question. I have to formulate it a little better, so I'll just wait for a minute. Thanks.
All right. Councilmember Castellano.
Thank you. Quick question about section 50.206B/D, and also in kind of looking at section 50.202G, the new G, which was old F. So, we struck if the sewer main replacement is the triggering event, the property owner shall be notified in advance and have the option to have their lateral replaced by the city's contractor as part of the project. And
Correct.
then costs incurred shall be the responsibility of the property owner. And then there's also a section though that has remained. The city is one of the triggering events is the city is proposing to repair or replace the sewer main serving the property.
Correct.
So
I think I know where you're going.
okay, great.
I think
Perfect.
I have an answer.
Go for it.
Originally, we anticipated that when the city comes in to do a main replacement, that the homeowners would pay for the laterals. Turns out that's just completely logistically infeasible. When we come in to do a main replacement, we've got contractors in there, they're bidding it, they're like having the homeowner involved in any way. There's no way to back charge them for it, to have our contractor do the work and then just back charge them for it, because they don't have any sort of agreement binding them to pay for anything that we're doing, and there's no leverage to make them do it, and we're already there digging. So if I was the homeowner, I wouldn't sign anything, just go replace it and try to stick me with it. So how it really worked out was the city, when we do a main replacement project, we just replace the laterals as part of the project. And kind of the reasoning behind that was, well, we're spending money on I&I anyway. We're spending money on I&I reduction in the field. We're spending money on I&I treatment at the treatment plant. We'll just consider the city replacing those laterals as the city's contribution towards I&I. So we just do it all as one project. So if you got lucky enough to have a sewer main in front of your house that was getting replaced, you got a free lower lateral out of it. And it was nothing more than just the logistical impossibility of charging the homeowner for doing that. So we took that language kind of was predicated on the idea we'd be able to charge people for that. So we just kind of took it out and said, the trigger is a little cleaner now. If the city's proposing to repair or replace the sewer main, the laterals have to get replaced, and the city will be replacing those as part of the project.
Okay. So you're stoked then if the city has to replace the sewer main by your house. And would it make sense to... I don't feel like that's necessarily clear in here that the city is going to be replacing the sewer lateral at that time, and there won't be a cost? I mean, would it make sense to indicate that?
It gets a little difficult because the next question is usually, well, where's that list of projects and am I on it? And the answer is there really isn't a list like that. So the sewer projects, main replacement projects, change right up to and including the point that we receive the bids from the contractors. So we may say in the CIP we want to do a main replacement project, and we narrow it down. We're going to do these 5 blocks, and then we draw it up and we get it all ready and we bid it out, and the bids come in and we go, we don't have that kind of money. Like, that costs 4 times what we thought it was going to cost. So now we can do this one block, or we can just abort that project entirely and take that money and go fix another problem over here that's more pressing. And that happens quite often depending on the bidding environment. So there's not really a list where you can say in 3 years we're going to be on your street replacing your main, so hold off on your lateral replacement. But that's what people want. That's what people expect when they see that language. So I kind of shied away from saying anything more about that topic in the code because it's just hard to explain to people, I guess.
Would it be, sorry, one more follow-up question on that. Would it be possible to, at that point, issue a certificate to the property owner that their lateral had been replaced? Because it seems like that would be nice for people to know.
Yes. So when the city comes in and replaces the main and we replace all the laterals, now your lower lateral is replaced, but your upper lateral is probably still clay. If it is, that is a triggering event that you're going to get a notice that you have to replace your upper lateral. So now you got to go hire a plumber. Once that's done, you get issued a certificate that says you're good. Upper and lower are completely replaced. Off you go. Still better than being notified that you have to do the whole thing.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Or Councilmember Royo, have you formulated yours?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I think I'm good to listen to public comment, and then I may have additional questions. I mean, Kim and I have been around this block a couple times, but it sounds like, yeah, it sounds like staff has worked to resolve the fairness issue to the extent they can, recognizing that it's a little bit challenging and unpredictable. But I thought it was an interesting point about, like, oh, well, if your lower lateral gets replaced, you're stoked, because it does sound like if that happens, that does trigger an inspection of the upper lateral. So you may actually be thrilled to save money on the lower, but then be required to spend money on the upper. Is that an accurate kind of assessment of that?
Yes, that is
Okay.
that is entirely accurate. And depending on the situation with your upper, again, that could be a $2,000 job or it could be a $10,000 job. It kind of depends on what your particular property situation is.
Yes, I've been on the receiving end of that. So yes, I get it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
One more thing I would like to point out is that based on comments from the Humboldt Association of Realtors this morning, I did have a clerical change to section, this section right here. So 50.202, where it talks about unless the property owner presents satisfactory proof to the city that sewer lateral, including clean out, is less than 25 years old. There's just the last part of that doesn't really make any sense. So we just clarified that piece of language to make it clear that if the house is less than 25 years old, then you don't have to worry about it. So it became this bit of language right here. So we just clarified it to say, unless the property owner presents satisfactory proof to the city that sewer lateral, including clean out, is less than 25 years old and has been inspected pursuant to a city issued permit. So that does two things. It covers the 25 years old part. It also covers the you got a permit to replace it, because it's possible they replaced their lateral, but they did it without a permit. It does happen. If you get caught in that situation, you go get an after the fact permit and get it inspected. And if it's good, it's good. So, but the language that was in there before was not as clear as it could be. So that was a good comment from the association that we took in today. So I would add that amendment.
Right on. Councilmember Castellano?
Sorry, I'm still going down the wormhole of this. If the city replaced the main and the upper lateral, so and then it triggers the lower lateral. Oh, sorry, the vice versa.
Vice versa.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so it triggers the inspection of the upper lateral. Would there be funding available from the city for that, or would that be then on the property owners to fund?
So the upper laterals are entirely on the property owners, but you can cover it with the loan. So the loan is applicable to the upper and the lower.
Okay, great. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No.
thanks.
Totally good.
All right. You ready for public comment? I know I saw somebody at least on Zoom. Is there anybody in-house who would like to make a public comment on this item? If you do, come on up.
Tina Christensen. I'm here talking for the Humboldt Association of Realtors, council members, and staff. First of all, I'd like to thank Brian and Miles both for attending our meeting and giving us some help and understanding. What I'm getting from this, Brian, is this that we wrote, you've corrected a lot of what I feel are conditions that we felt needed to be addressed better, and it seems like you've done that. I know the association appreciates it, and I'm sure you all saw that the Association of Realtors has sold over 600 houses since this came in, and I guarantee you that a lot of those houses did not have lateral inspections. And because of the big disclosure laws in real estate now, we all came to an understanding that this is a big issue, and it's an issue for both buyers and sellers alike. So, yes, I think the Board of Realtors is on board for some kind. We deal with them in Rio Dell, we deal with them in Ferndale, we deal with them in Arcata. You brought up some very good points. The loan is especially crucial in the city of Eureka. It appears that a lot of the citizens in Eureka are at entry-level housing. And you also saw we gave you some bills. And those bills represent $25,000 almost on each house. So when Miles was there, Miles said that, we can probably increase those loans. And I know a lot of people, $25,000 is a lot of money. That upper lateral on the ones I've had inspected has been around $12,000. And that doesn't count the lower. And I also see you're opening up for sleeving and the other possibilities of other things. And yes, it is a good project for somebody, and I know a couple of the A contractors that are looking at doing some of that work, so it could be local. So I don't have enough time I think it would be a good idea if you guys could postpone it with what you've said. I'd like to take it back to our committees and it all looks great to me, but it was a community effort for 535 realtors. So, thank you.
Thank you. Did we have somebody else from the audience who wanted to come up?
Hello, I'm Mark Costa with Humboldt Premier Properties, not a member of the local Humboldt Association of Realtors. Great questions on your guys' behalf. This is there's a lot involved in this, and thank you for talking this over with us as well, Brian. One of our main concerns is the infrastructure that's failing tends to be in the areas of lower income areas. So, when I was 20 years ago or 30 years ago living on Little Fairfield Street, raising a family, if I had a bill come at me at $25,000 and a deed, a cloud or a lien put on my house, that's huge. I mean, it's astronomical for the guy that's paycheck to paycheck. So I think there was a failure of the former mayor vetoing this years ago, where we could have got ahead of this and been, a few years in the process of maybe working with the city employees to do the work, or had a better chance of getting in front of this thing, instead of now where we're sitting at a point where we're getting sued again, the city's getting sued again, we have to do something right now. So my thought process was it'd be nice to be able to spread the cost throughout everybody in the city. Everybody in the city is using the facility to, that's the treatment plant. So in effect, everybody is involved in the uses of that treatment plant. So it's not just, my sewer lateral is bad, yours is okay, I have to fix mine. It's the idea being, if you could add it onto a sewer bill or a water bill, or and make it over a 10-year period where it's getting paid for, even if the projects only are a 2-year period project. I think we're going to see right away, we're selling 500 houses in a year. The following year, you're not going to have to replace 500. It might be some of the houses that you've already sold. So that number might be less going down the line. And if we can get contractors in here, or a local contractor, to get the proper equipment, we could be down to, 4,500, maybe 3,000 on multiple jobs. So concerns being too much for homeowners to take on in the lower income areas, and to spread that fee somehow throughout the city. But I think we're, it's a big step, and I am on all for the point of sale, and it happening, sooner than later, to clear up the confusion.
Thank you very much. Did we have anybody else? All right.
Hi, I'm Felicia Costa, also with Humboldt Premier Properties. Thank you, Brian, for taking the time to talk with us and go back and forth with us. I'm a broker for in handling real estate transactions, and have been dealing with this in the field, boots on the ground, for several years now, since you guys put this in place in 2020 with the triggering events. Really, I just wanted to make a comment about logistically, my concern about logistically implementing this, as far as when we do a transaction, the life of a transaction is generally about 45 days. That's how long, and I'm talking about regarding a point of sale. If this is a point of sale, which it's going to be, we have 45 days. The buyers usually have 17 days to do whatever inspections they're going to do. That's going to include having the sewer lateral inspected, and then they're supposed to remove contingencies and move forward with a loan and paying for an appraisal. Anyway, there are all kinds of logistics in the transaction, in the escrow transaction, that are going to be impacted by this process. So if it's just going to be negotiated, you're negotiating an $8,500 payment to the city, that's one thing. That's fairly straightforward. But if there's actually work that's going to need to be done, the city is going to have to be involved with paperwork or loans, or I don't know what all is going to be involved. I just can anticipate that could get to be a nightmare and hold up transactions when a seller needs to go and a buyer needs to come in, and if everything else is done and we're just trying to get communication back and forth with the city to get this sewer lateral negotiated and into a passable situation, then that's a concern I have, just time-wise, just having the infrastructure and the staff to implement this correctly in a way that allows us to continue to do these transactions for the people that live here and need to do them. So that was my feedback.
Thank you. Anybody else in-house? All right.
Hi, I'm Pat, and I'm not a realtor. I'm a nurse. And I should have been retired 5 years ago, and I'm still working full time. And if you try to slap me with a loan, $8,500, $25,000, I will not pay it. All right? Just very, very, very slowly tell you to go to hell, because I should have been retired, and now I'm firmly middle class, and I want to retire. We got seniors out there, and they can't afford anything like this. One thing you can do is you can start taxing the wealthy, even though they pay for your campaigns. Why don't you try thinking about the little guy for once, okay? I won't pay that. I had to buy a house, and I'm renting to seniors, and I'm not making any money off of it. And I'll tell you right now, I want to do an ADU because I want to help more seniors. And if somebody tries to slap me with that, I won't pay it.
Do we have anybody else in-house that would like to speak? All right, if not, we'll go ahead and go to Zoom.
Philip?
Thank you. I appreciate the time, thought, and clarity provided by Deputy Director of Public Works and the conciseness of this presentation. I also appreciate the efforts to ease the homeowner burden as we face these costs. The interest I perceived to take city ownership, not from city staff, to take city ownership of new laterals concerns me. I believe we are about to discuss rate hikes related to the cost, increases related to city water and sewer infrastructure degradation, which, as I understand it, those also, depending on the pipe material and the conditions, last 40 to 100 years. Not an expert, but I believe you have those experts. So any suggestion that a 100-year lateral won't be a future burden on the city if city takes ownerships of the upper laterals posits that the city won't last another 100 years. Now, I am a homeowner. I don't want this burden, but I accept the burden because that is the cost of residing in a low density R1 zoned area. In all matters, I would urge council and city to consider the long term so that the city stays solvent financially in the long term for the next 100 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other public comment on Zoom? You could raise your hand or you can unmute. Susie, were you trying to speak?
Yes, I was.
Go ahead.
Hey, I had a couple of questions. I did go back and forth quite a bit with Brian earlier or last week, and I am out of town right now, so it'll be quick. He was saying that the pipes are good for 100 years, but every 25 years, homeowners are expected to get recertified. Why would that be? The next thing I had was on the title transfer, and I don't have my paperwork in front of me, I'm sorry, but the title transfer is, or every time you transfer title, it triggers the sewer lateral. That means if I put my house into a trust, or if my spouse dies, or I add one of my kids to the title, it triggers this sewer lateral ordinance. And that's pretty unreasonable. Brian did tell me that they weren't going to be searching through the archives to see what houses transferred title in a particular year. But when I hear him say that, I also add a ... You're not doing it yet, but I could see it coming. The other thing is that, you know, if the city's going through and doing it and you get it done for free, far out. Great for you. You have to do the upper lateral, but that's half the cost. I just wonder how fair and equitable and inclusive, and let's use all those buzzwords, how right is that to give something to one citizen that the other citizen has to pay for? I really struggle with that. And, you know, the estimates that I've gotten were at $28,000, and that was on a house in the city close to the sewer lateral or the sewer main. So I'm struggling a bit with that financing. I'm not seeing the low prices that Brian has quoted. It's not what I've heard. I'm concerned about that title transfer trigger. And then if the plastic lines are good for 100 years, why do we have to get certified every 25 years? That's all I needed to say. And thank you for listening. Appreciate you guys tackling this.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else on Zoom who would like to make a comment on this? All right. It looks like I will close public comment and I will bring it back for discussion and all right, Natalie. Councilmember Arroyo. Sorry, I got familiar for a sec.
We're pretty familiar by now. It's okay. Well, this is one that, you know, as everyone here knows, came up years ago, and the council voted to move forward with the point of sale provision. And I still think, all things told, that was the right thing to do. And one of the reasons for that is that, you know, I believe that when you own private property, one of your responsibilities is to get your poo to the sewer lateral. And the part of that that's, you know, on your property or even traverses public property to get to the main, it seems reasonable to have homeowners pay for that. But certainly the upper lateral, I don't have any qualms whatsoever about requiring that people have their upper lateral inspected and maintained. And part of that is the cost of sewage treatment, which we're going to, you know, a couple of public commenters mentioned. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. And those costs are statutorily required to be borne by the people who pay for those services. And so, you know, if one person's a bad actor and maybe doesn't know it, maybe they have a bunch of broken, you know, parts to their sewer lateral, and they're, you know, having a lot of inflow from rain events into the system, jacking up the costs for everybody else. I don't think that's fair. And so I would say that my thinking around that has not changed in the last, you know, 6 years or however long it's been. I always thought the point of sale trigger was more fair to buyers, and that when people are selling a home, there's different ways for them to negotiate or handle an unexpected cost when they're about to sell a home. Then, you know, I think particularly in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of buyers buying homes with almost no, you know, period of time in which to do inspections. And we've seen a lot of people so desperate to buy a home that they have foregone anything that could help them suss out any problems. And so that makes me even more worried for them, that I don't think this is happening voluntarily. I think very few of these types of inspections have been happening voluntarily. And I also think that's a disservice to people who probably don't have a lot of experience, frankly. You know, the people who are getting the short end of the stick there are probably people who don't have a ton of experience in the, you know, in investing and in buying property. And then there's the obvious water quality concerns of, you know, if poo, you know, if water can come in, poo can come out. And I obviously have those concerns, which the people who sued us share. And then, you know, I would say I do have questions about that, the matter of whether it's a title transfer to say, you know, a loved one, but there's no actual transfer of the property happening yet, or a refinance. You know, if each time they're going through that title process, if that mandates the trigger for the inspection, that seems a little excessive. So I don't know if staff have any thoughts or solutions there. And I would just say there's always been the fairness issue of the main replacement, and it doesn't mean that I don't think that it's reasonable to move forward with this. It's the lower lateral replacement when the main is being done. And I would say it's, comparable to, we all pay taxes and sometimes our road doesn't get fixed for 15 years. And, someone else's road does get fixed. But we're all responsible for that collectively. So I think there is a certain amount of collective responsibility that we're talking about here. And I'm not sure, it's not always fair, but I think we have to find some approach that kind of finds that middle ground here. I do really appreciate, the Humboldt Association of Realtors and the independent realtors and people who have experience with property transfer weighing in on this. I think this has been a much more collaborative process, which I appreciate. But I still think we're going to have to make a hard call here about what we think is fair and how to distribute the responsibility. I do think it makes more sense for people to be able to pay it on their sewer bill than have a separate lien on their property, and that could have other unintended consequences. But I also understand what you're saying, Deputy Director Issa, about that process and about how that wasn't. I imagine there's some Prop 218 reasons behind that, but ultimately, I've borne the cost of this. I hear the person saying that it's often the low-income neighborhoods, and it's also the old houses. So I bought a real fixer, and am trying very hard to restore it. And I know that I'm going to be going through this process yet again really soon. And I'm not eligible for the city's loan. I do hope that we could, potentially consider increasing the amount of loan that we would offer, beyond the amount that's been discussed tonight. So I'd love to hear other council members' thoughts on that, and I'll pause there and hear other people.
Councilmember Castellano.
I just have a quick question about the title transfer, because my understanding is they might already have a certificate for that property, so that would kind of carry over in that case.
Certificates would carry over. They run with the property, correct?
Yeah. Sorry. Are you asking for clarification?
Yeah, I think what the commenter was concerned about is that, let's say I pass away and I want to put if we didn't have it in our names together, and I wanted to put the house into my wife's name or into my son's name, that this would trigger that. Mm-hmm. Technically. Not that we would have police monitoring this all the time to see what transfers are happening, but technically that would trigger an inspection.
I guess I was kind of thinking about the case, I think, that was stated of like multiple transfers. I mean, it would only trigger it once, basically. Okay.
Councilmember Moulton.
Councilmember Arroyo said she wouldn't be eligible for the city's loan. Is that because she's an elected, or that's the only reason? There's not some other thing that would make it's not income tied or anything like that?
That's the only reason.
None
of us are eligible at as far as I know, and I'm working to get more information about that. But I think we are not eligible, even though this is open to everyone, because you've been the decision makers on this.
Sure. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't some other element of qualifying for the loan that I was missing. Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment and just say thank you so much for adding the person to help somebody walk through this, because the money is a huge pain point. But the money, on top of being confused and not being able to really feel like you have somebody in City Hall that's helping you through it, is just exacerbates it so much. And so we didn't talk a lot about that, but I really wanted to point out that I saw that, and I'm really grateful that you put it in there. So thank you. And
I can weigh in and sort of address a couple of the other questions, if you like.
Sure.
So let's start with the 25-year versus 100-year, the design life of the pipe. Yes, I was being flippant when I said you wouldn't have to touch the pipe for another 100 years because it's plastic. The caller is 100% correct. No engineer is they're going to tell you the design life of plastic pipe is 25 years. The reality is we have clay pipe in the ground that the design life was probably to 20 to 25 years, and it's been in 100 years or more. So true, but the point is a good one. The 25-year came directly out of Arcata's ordinance, so it's just a point of consistency when we originally crafted the ordinance. I try not to reinvent the wheel unless we have to, so that's where that came from. So it's kind of an arbitrary number. With regard to the equity issue of the city paying for laterals as part of the main replacement, but if you don't happen to be one of those lucky people, you pay the full cost. It's a good point. And it's not one that we have not considered. One way that the council might choose to think about that, when we get to the point of adopting that fee for the lower lateral, the city could choose to bring some amount of rate-funded I&I money to lower that fee, to subsidize that fee to some amount. So if we say the 8,500 number that I threw out was a math number based on the average cost that we're seeing from the contractors, the council could choose to use rate monies to subsidize that number to the tune of whatever they feel like. So that's when we come back and talk about the actual fee and the amount of the fee and the logistics of the loans and stuff, that is something that the council could consider as a way to lower the difference between being the lucky person on the street with the main replacement and the unlucky person on the next street over that just has a busted lateral. With regard to the sewer bills, again, that was just a software issue that our billing software, initially we thought that was something it would do, but apparently that's not something it would do. I did hear from the finance director that we're thinking about having an outside firm actually service those loans, which would make it definitely not part of the sewer bill. So it would be a bill that would be coming separate from the utility bill. On the transfer of title, there is an exception in here for property ownership transfers between family members where there's no reassessment of property value. So I'm not a realtor. I don't do that as a living. I'm hoping that softens that concern a little bit. If not, I'll probably hear about it.
I'd just like to give a little counterpoint to the fortune of having your main replaced. So let's talk about low-income folks. Low-income folks lives in their house. They don't spend $50,000. They have nothing that triggers this thing. They're just living in that area. We decide to replace a main. That's going to trigger their thing. And they're going to be paying for their upper lateral. So I don't want to say that you're fortunate to have that main, because it can be difficult on people because of that trigger. And if people are just living in their house and they're not spending $50,000 and not doing these other things and they're not selling their house, that trigger would never happen.
We done with all of the comments you're going to have? I'll send it over to Councilmember Moulton.
Actually, I was just going to say that that it would be unfair for somebody to have this process triggered when they weren't doing any work, and that sort of balances out in my mind. And I just wanted to echo thank you for putting in the additional staff person into one of the commenters' concerns. I think that'll have a big impact on how quickly this can all go through. So when you are looking at those sales that need to happen fast, at least you have one person to talk to, and the process is streamlined within one office. That's just a comment. Thank you.
Councilmember Burgell.
So I've been really enjoying this conversation. A lot of great information. I'm curious, so I do support the increase of the loan amount. I think that would be really helpful to folks. But I'm also curious, are there any other avenues that folks could, I don't know that there would be grant funding we could try and access to help people at a certain income level or age, which I don't know if age is, but certainly to help support them, and especially if they end up having to do both.
There's nothing that I'm aware of as far as grant funding, but I'd say that one thing that is very advantageous to folks is the ability to delay this and be on a list and be put on the list that we could go out and that we could bid for the lower laterals. So when somebody is notified or they do an inspection and they're notified that they need to replace their lower lateral, they can say, okay, I want to put on this list and I want to be a part of that next bid process that the city puts out. So delays the cost. It's not an initial thing that'd have to be paid. Obviously, if it's a point of sale trigger, it would be different. But that would be one thing beneficial. There's nothing that I'm aware of from a grant standpoint that could offset the cost for the property owners. I think the loan is pretty beneficial, especially at that rate, especially in today's day and age. That rate is pretty reasonable. But I'm not aware, unless Deputy Director is aware of anything that could help offset this.
Any more discussion, or is anybody ready to make a recommendation? Councilmember Moulton.
I just had one more question. I thought of an edge case. Is there any chance at all? So someone gets their line inspected. It's terracotta. It needs to be replaced, and then we put them on this list for aggregate. Pulling it all together. So it's waiting. Is there any chance at all that the inspection process could cause a failure that would make it an urgent problem rather than something that can wait to be part of a bigger project?
No.
Awesome.
If anything,
simple.
No is the simple answer. Sorry.
Councilmember Burgell.
So just one more clarification. So that was a great point, bringing up the idea that we can pull all these resources together, all these projects together, and get a lower cost. So if people are paying $8,500, right, they're getting a loan for that for the lower lateral, and the cost is $4,500, will the city be doing rebates at the end of that project?
No, as it's written. Sorry. As it's written, it's done every year. There'll be an evaluation of the previous 2 years of bids and determining what that average cost would be, and then there'd be an administrative fee put on top of that. So it would be based on whatever the previous 2 years average costs for the average lateral. Now it's going to have outliers, as we've heard here. We've heard of people that have a property up on Fairfield and the main's out on Broadway. That's going to be a heck of a lot more significant. So there's outliers of that. There's other ones that are really close and a lot less expensive. So we figure out in the end it'll all average out, and it'll be the average cost. Yeah. And hopefully this technology moves up here, and because of this, I think that there will be a lot of incentives. As the realtor had stated, I think that there's going to be a lot of interest in our contractor community looking at different technologies in order to be able to offer this for a lot lower cost.
The city manager is absolutely right. The thought was that this is an average cost because these laterals are going to be all over town. They're not going to be on one main on a 3-block stretch. They're going to be all over the place. Some of them will be dig and replace and will be $20,000. Some of them will be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. So the idea is that it all comes out in the wash. If we were going to give people a rebate, then we would also want to go back and charge people who's came in 3 or 4 times. It's just logistically, it's too much. The hope is that it will all just sort of even out.
All right. Councilmember Bauer.
So there's been a lot of discussion, obviously, about this, and a lot of people wanting to make modifications and a suggestion to postpone a decision. Is there any, and not that I'm suggesting that, but is there anything that precludes us from postponing?
No, as a matter of fact, the city attorney and I were discussing, City Attorney Luna and I were discussing, depending on some of the suggestions that happen here, it may require that we come back and reintroduce depending on what council directs staff to do. So we may have to come back with a reintroduction anyway. If that's the case, then we'd reach out to other folks. If it turns out that you guys are good with this and there's not significant changes, this would be the introduction, and the next time it would come back as adoption. So,
Councilmember Burgell.
So would raising the loan amount be something that we would have to reintroduce?
No, the loan amount is already built in. It's going to be done by policy so that we don't have to come back. And I want to be, as we're doing this now, this is an ordinance. It's a little more cumbersome than updating a policy, but if there are changes that need to be made later, this can come back to council for, adjustments to the existing ordinance as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Arroyo.
Yeah, I just wanted to get some clarity around the, you know, so we're talking about averages, but people would still retain the ability to retain their own contractor if they wanted to and do it independently of the city's process, right?
Sure. Yeah. If
So
people want to
if
hire,
someone wants to, yeah,
yeah,
okay. So if someone like had a, felt they had a really simple project and they could retain their own contractor and meet the obligations, have a functional sewer lateral, there would be nothing preventing them from doing that.
if your cousin is a Class A contractor and he'll do it dirt cheap, absolutely do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, I guess there's a reason why it's been a point of pain when we first brought it forward. It's been a point of pain in the years since. It was certainly a difficult thing for me in my home. And, I don't know that there's any easy solution. This is one of those that just feels like there's not one easy answer that's going to feel fair and equitable, but I think it's very reasonable to proceed with it, especially when we look at the costs that we're bearing for wastewater treatment in the city, in part because of all of this inflow and infiltration. So I suppose with that in mind, I will proceed with the staff recommendation to waive read by title only and introduce bill number 1021 tax CS, an ordinance of the city of Eureka amending chapter 50 of the Eureka Municipal Code.
I'll second.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Burgell. Oh, okay. Okay, that's gonna be separate. So we have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion?
Just to clarify, with the amendment as proposed by council to section, or by staff to section 50.202, which was the 25-year bit. So that is a change from the one that was submitted to the council. That one.
So you want that
right
in
there.
the motion?
Correct.
Councilmember
And
Royo?
just so you guys know, that's not substantive. That would not, the next time if approved, this would come back for adoption.
Councilmember Royo, you okay with that staff recommendation for change?
Sure. 25 years seems like it's a little short, like it could be longer, but if staff really feel that that's a good metric for performance of that material, is that
25 years.
Bill?
25 years is basically the design life of that material, and again, it's a point of consistency with Arcadas. So.
Okay. But more importantly, that's what the material is supposed to perform for.
Minimum, yes.
Okay. All right, then I'm comfortable with that.
All right, so Councilmember Moulton, you okay with that?
I'm also comfortable with that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, go ahead and vote.
Aye.
Unanimous vote, motion carries.
Before we move on, I want to thank everybody for coming out here. This has been something that's come up time and again. I know it's been something I've talked to staff about for a very long time, and nobody likes it. I mean, nobody wants to have to do this, but also everybody wants the sewer to work. If we don't have work in sewer, nobody will be happy. So thank you for taking the time to come out. Thank you to the Board of Realtors and the independent realtors who have really worked with the city on making this ordinance the best it can be. And thank you to staff for really learning from the last several times of doing this and trying to produce something that's consistent and really helpful. And it's not going to be fun, but hopefully it will be better in the future. So thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and say let's take a break now before we get to item H3, and we'll see you back in about 10 minutes. So we are now to item H3. Looks like we're ready to go with our chief building official, Brendan Riley.
So
not quite on the air
before Chief Building Official Riley starts, I just want to introduce Chief Building Official Riley. I think this is his first soiree into the public meeting forum. So I want to welcome him. He's been a great addition to the team. We've done a lot of good things in building since we've been here. So anyway, this is our new Chief Building Official, Brendan Riley.
And you've been here about 5 months?
No, since last October.
So
in the capacity as chief building official since I believe February, somewhere around there. But
well, it is good to see you in front of us.
Well, thanks. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll try to keep this brief. This should be pretty low key. So every 3 years, the California Building Standards Commission releases a new edition of the Title 24 Building Standards Code. The last edition brought the requirement for solar, and it was kind of a big deal, a lot of added expense to construction projects. This code cycle is far less exciting. The most significant thing that I've found so far is the fact that they did not do a prohibition on new installations of gas appliances. We all kind of thought that was coming. What they did instead was mandated that whenever you install a gas appliance, that you also run a 240 volt circuit with that appliance for conversion to future electric. And then they changed some stuff in the Title 24 software, which it's kind of like the whole house envelope. It takes into account insulation, U values, and solar heat gain coefficients for windows, and it allows you to kind of model your house different from the prescriptive manner that they will also allow you to use to build. And what they did was they created preferences for heat pump water heaters and for mini splits. And I haven't run one of these yet, so I'm not sure exactly to what extent things have tightened up, but I've heard that it's quite a difference. So, and they might not have de facto just said no more gas appliances. I think what they did was made them really hard to use. Another significant change on the residential side is what's termed aging in place fixtures. So they're planning for, as people age, needing things like grab bars in the shower and behind toilets. And so now there's a requirement for new residential construction that in one entry-level bathroom, blocks are provided behind the toilet and then in the showers to accommodate future handrails. Also, the door to that bathroom needs to be a minimum of 32 inches wide, which is basically the ADA standard. And then outlets and switches and other receptacles need to be a minimum of 15 inches off the ground and a maximum of 48. And then the only other substantial new requirement is in the electrical code, which requires a surge protector on in front of the meter, or excuse me, in between the meter and the main breaker, so that if there's some kind of power surge, it doesn't fry all the electronics in the house. I haven't been able to figure out exactly how much cost this adds yet, because we're having trouble figuring out exactly what part this is at this point, but I can't imagine it's going to be a whole lot, and I bet it'll save people a lot of money in the event that it does need to be used. And then on the commercial side, there's almost no changes that are really remarkable, other than now they've mandated EV chargers in commercial parking lots over 25 spaces. So we should start seeing a lot more of that being installed on the bigger projects. But that is all.
Wow. That was quite short. The state usually likes to
there's
make
not a
so
whole lot
many
there.
regulations. And,
Yeah, this time there just wasn't a lot that changed.
do we have any questions? Councilmember Bauer.
Yeah, thank you for that short report. For the EV charging, if it's over 25, they're just requiring one or two? Or?
They require one that's actually installed, and then a certain number of EV-ready spaces, which there's two different classifications. There's one of them is basically you put the conduit in, and the other one is you put the conduit in and run the wire. And there's a certain number of each of those spaces that are also required.
Okay.
But only one needs to be permanently installed as a charging station.
Okay. And then with the gas appliances, so you said that you can still get them, but you have to just run power so you can switch.
Yeah, so there's an outlet that's nearby. So later on, when they finally do flip it so that they can't be installed, then you'll have access to power.
Thank you.
Councilmember Moulton.
I actually don't have a question. Could I get a paper copy of the agenda? My device just died.
If we don't have any other questions, I'll go ahead and open to public comment. Do you have any public commenters here? Well, that's a good sign that the state's not doing anything too crazy then, right?
Not this time.
And I just want to double check on Zoom. There's nobody on Zoom who's. No? We'll double check.
If there's anyone on Zoom, please raise your hand or unmute your mic. Seeing none.
All right, then I will go ahead and close public comment, and I will bring it back to council for discussion or motion. Councilmember Bauer.
I'd like to make the motion to waive reading, read by title only, and introduce bill number 1022-CS, an ordinance of the City of Eureka, amending Eureka Municipal Code Title 9, Chapter 92, including sections 92.1, 92.01 through 92.07, adopting by reference the 2022 edition of the California Fire Code and related model code with appendices and amendments, all relating to fire regulations. I read the second one. I didn't read the first one, did I? Oh my God. I shouldn't have chosen that. And waive reading, read by title only, introduce bill number 1023-CS, an ordinance of the City of Eureka, amending Eureka Municipal Code. I can't talk tonight. Title 15, Chapter 150, including sections 150.002 and 150.015 through 150.026, adopting by reference the 2022 editions of the California Building Standards Code and related model codes with appendices and amendments, all related to building regulations. I did it backwards. Sorry.
It's all in there, though. Do we have a second on that?
A second.
Councilmember Castellano seconded. Any further discussion on this item? All right, everybody go ahead and vote.
Councilmember Arroyo?
Aye.
Unanimous vote, motion carries.
Chief Building Official Riley, I think you got off way too easy. And the next time you come back to council after being here for months and months and months and not coming at all.
Of course.
I think it should be something contentious and filling the room. Thank you. All right, so we are going to move on to our reports and action items. And for this, we have Principal Planner Kenyon. And we're going to talk about the Coastal Land Use Plan.
Good evening, Council. Tonight is the third in a series of review sessions on the comprehensive update of the Coastal Land Use Plan. So to recap, the Local Coastal Program, or LCP for short, is the standard of review for coastal development permits. So when we get a coastal development permit application, it has to be consistent with these policies for us to approve it. There's two parts to an LCP, the Land Use Plan, or LUP, and the Implementation Plan, or IP. And the Land Use Plan is those parts of a general plan that apply to the coastal zone and relate to the Coastal Act. And then the IP are the parts of our municipal code that implement the LUP. So tonight, right now we're working on the comprehensive update to the LUP, and then once we've submitted that to the Coastal Commission, we'll start working through the IP update. As a reminder, staff proposes this new LUP to be a coastal element of our general plan that duplicates relevant portions of other parts of the general plan and has additional policies and maps necessary to carry out the Coastal Act. Staff recommends it be organized into 6 chapters, and tonight we're talking about the Land and Aquatic Resources chapter. And we're also bringing the figures from the Public Access and Recreation chapter that weren't ready last time for your review and comment. Just to keep in mind, this coastal element only applies in the coastal zone. So if there's policies we want that to apply citywide, we should add them to a different part of the general plan because the policies in this section are only going to apply in the coastal zone. Also, it's a part of the general plan, so the policy should be broad for a 20-year planning horizon, and we should delegate the details to the IP, to the Coastal Zoning Code. And it must conform with the Coastal Act to get certified by the Coastal Commission. So especially with the Land and Aquatic Resources chapter, we're constricted on what we can put in there because we have to be as protective of coastal resources as the Coastal Act. So we're kind of limited in our discretion to a degree. And staff is proposing 6 sections in this chapter, and there's a lot of policies, so I'm just going to cover some key highlights. The first section, water quality and hydrology. In the general plan, the goals are what we would like to see. They answer that question. So protection, enhancement, and restoration of water resources, as well as improvement of water quality. This is a duplicate goal that's in the natural resource chapter of our general plan already. We got comments back from Coastal Commission staff in review of the chapter, and they wanted us to incorporate Coastal Act policies directly about marine resources and water quality. So we did that. And they also told us we needed to add stormwater control policies. We couldn't just cite consistency with the state MS4 permit and our existing city stormwater ordinance. And I can explain the reasoning for that. But we added draft policies to address stormwater, and they have model policies that they wanted us to add that are really long. And so we kept the substance of them, but we made them more like general plan policies to keep the details for the coastal zoning code. The second section is about environmentally sensitive habitat areas, and it's implementing this Coastal Act Policy 30240, which has 2 parts. And the first part is basically limiting any development in an environmentally sensitive habitat area to uses dependent on the resources of the habitat area. So resource dependent uses is the only thing you can do there. So we've included that language, and we've also tried to define what a resource dependent use is. And one thing to point out is we're saying that tribal access to tribal cultural resources is a resource dependent use, and I haven't seen that in any other LUP, so we'd be the first city to propose that. Also, we're modifying how we define environmentally sensitive habitat area. The Coastal Act defines it as an area where plant or animal life or their habitat is especially rare or valuable. And currently, we have a list and we say that all wetlands are ESHA. And so, for example, there's a wetland behind Eureka Natural Foods and Walgreens that was created by the removal of a building foundation that's contaminated. And it is a wetland. And right now in our current LUP, it's ESHA, which means you have to buffer from it. But in how we've updated it, unless it's providing habitat for like northern red-legged frog or something, it's not going to be an ESHA. Sorry, environmentally sensitive habitat area. And also, we added a provision about allowing temporary construction disruption in ESHA if there's no feasible alternative and if it's restored within a year. And we did that because there's some roads that go through ESHA and there's no other alternative for maintenance other than staging in ESHA. And not sure if the Coastal Commission will allow this, but I saw it recently certified in the Half Moon Bay LUP. So I thought I would try. The Coastal Commission staff also said we needed a map of ESHA. And so we're proposing a potential ESHA map. And we based it on National Wetlands Inventory and California Natural Diversity Database mapping. And basically anywhere that's unpaved in the coastal zone is potential ESHA. And there's a draft policy that says you're going to need a site-specific biological assessment for mapped sites to determine whether ESHA exists or not. And you also may need one elsewhere if there's evidence of ESHA, environmentally sensitive habitat area. The second part of 30240, that policy of the Coastal Act, talks about development near ESHA, and it says it shall be sited and designed to prevent impacts which would significantly degrade the habitat. And that's where all the buffer policies come from on the coast, where you have to buffer from habitat. So there's not actually like a buffer number, minimum open space buffer requirement in the Coastal Act. It just says you shouldn't degrade the area, and that's the criteria. So we've included that language, and we're proposing to keep our existing buffer policy, which says you need a 100-foot minimum buffer from ESHA, but it allows further reduction with a site-specific analysis and mitigation, demonstrating that you're not going to degrade the habitat area. And I've worked with a lot of buffer policies, and I think Eureka's is good because it has this restrictive standard, but then it allows further flexibility with, expert analysis. Also, the Coastal Commission likes to see a policy about allowed uses in ESHA buffers, and we're proposing just to say, anything's allowed in ESHA buffers that meets that 30240 threshold of not significantly degrading the area, and then leaving the details to the IP, to the Coastal Zoning Code, to allow more flexibility. Third section is about wetlands and watercourses. It implements Coastal Act 30233, which basically significantly limits when you can dike, fill, and dredge wetlands. And we've included that language. And one thing to note is that we've added to the definition of wetland this idea that stormwater and wastewater infrastructure and agricultural ponds don't meet the definition of wetlands if they're constructed and continuously maintained for their intended function. And the reason is because, like, for instance, the ponds at the wastewater treatment plant, like the wastewater holding ponds, they do meet the definition of wetlands technically, but if we regulated them under the Coastal Act wetland policy, we wouldn't be able to maintain them for their intended function. Same with people like vegetated drainage swales that people put in to infiltrate stormwater. So that's why we're proposing this caveat. 4 sections about channel dredging and sediment relocation. And there's just 3 policies in this section about promoting dredging of navigation channels. And then there's parameters for on when and how channel dredging is allowed, and parameters for dredged sediment relocation. The 5th section is about cultural resources. It implements Coastal Act Policy 30244, which talks about where development would adversely impact cultural resources, reasonable mitigation measures shall be required. So we're adding a policy to implement that Coastal Act policy, but we're proposing a more protective policy that talks about avoiding cultural resources whenever feasible, and then minimizing and mitigating to the maximum extent feasible rather than just like reasonable mitigation measures. And then there's a bunch of policies that are already in the 2040 general plan that we're proposing to duplicate in this coastal element. And then one additional one about when pre-development archaeological surveys may be required or construction phase excavation monitoring. And then the sixth section is on scenic and visual resources. And it implements Coastal Act Policy 30251, which talks about, in part, that permitted development shall be sited and designed to protect views to and along the ocean and scenic coastal areas. So the introduction to this section lists scenic resources in the city, both natural and built. And then there's a policy about protecting views of scenic resources from public vantage points. And then there's a figure that identifies protected views from the coastal trail, and another figure that identifies protected view corridors along the northern waterfront down streets. And then it holds those protected views that are mapped to a higher standard. It also requires a view impact analysis when you could potentially be impacting views of scenic resources from public vantage points. And the draft map of protected view corridors, this will impact redevelopment of C to F Street and the Union Pacific site because they'll have to avoid affecting those view corridors if council decides to adopt this policy. And then we're also bringing forward tonight the draft figures from the public access and recreation chapter that include figures that show existing and proposed public and recreation facilities, public access and recreation facilities, and figures showing existing and proposed bicycle facilities. And unfortunately, the timing is poor because we're about to go through a public input process for a bike plan. So we anticipate having to update this map once we go through that process, but it will take a while to get certification from the Coastal Commission, so it might just work out that they get on the same track. And I want to thank, I don't know, is Senior Planner Riley Toplewski?
Yes.
For preparing these maps for us. That's my presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Councilmember Moulton.
Could you give me an example of a protected public vantage point of a view?
In Eureka. So anywhere looking out from the coastal trail would be protected.
Okay.
Out towards the bay, not towards the mall or something.
Yeah, I understand.
Councilmember Arroyo.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I meant to put my hand up and I started putting other emojis up and I couldn't stop.
I thought I was like, Natalie's excited about something.
Really excited.
Hearts.
I was wondering, I truly cannot remember where we put this language, but at one point we included some right to fish language in our general plan, I believe, and I'm curious whether that really, you feel it belongs in this section. Not sure whether that would belong in aquatic resources or something else. Any thoughts there? It was like formalizing people's right to fish in Eureka. And I think it was important to the Fishermen's Marketing Association at the time, but also fishing advocates.
Is that about, for instance, like, I think we added that to the fishing section, which was in the public access and recreation chapter. And we also are adding something about it, or proposing to add something about it in the coastal dependent industrial section, which is coming up in the land use chapter. If it's what I'm thinking it is, and it's like their right to make bad smells and noises along the waterfront and nobody can complain who owns property near them, right? Like right to farm equivalent.
I think it was more about that than it was about the recreational aspect. So that, I think the commercial fishing community has been concerned about being pushed out by people saying, yeah, we don't want to hear this equipment at 3 a.m. or smell this processing facility. So exactly. So if that's going to be in CDI, that makes sense to me. And then I had one other question about, in the dredging section, so looking at the Coastal Act language, it looks like there's specifically language in section 30233 about dredge spoil beneficial reuse for beach replenishment where possible. But then in our, sorry, just one second, in LAR 4.3 sediment relocation, it talks about allow for sediment or for materials suitable for upland, wetland, and aquatic environments. And then I couldn't find a definition of aquatic environments, but I guess I just want to be sure that we're spelling out that we will try to do beach replenishment if that is feasible in the future. Because I think I just heard a Coastal Commission geologist talk today about beach replenishment in Southern California being, kind of a big need. So I want to make sure that that's articulated clearly in our plan.
Yeah, that's a good question. We changed it from beach replenishment to a broader idea because we don't have beaches like they have in Southern California, and we want to keep reiterating that in our coastal land use plan. But we do want to promote beneficial reuse, and there's a lot about that in the introduction to this section, but I was thinking it might be a good idea to have like a fourth policy that promotes beneficial reuse more clearly for sea level rise adaptation reasons and other reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thought I had was I don't know if there's room to add a definition in the perhaps aquatic, since you're wanting to use that more broadly. Perhaps that could be in the glossary, or I don't know what your thoughts were about how to define aquatic, or if it's defined in another chapter.
It's not, and maybe also beneficial reuse deserves a definition so that it's understood we're not just dropping it offshore in an aquatic environment. Beneficial reuse in an aquatic environment would mean, I understand. We could potentially just remove aquatic environment. The idea is we might want to use sediment in the future in like a mudflat area for salt marsh creation for sea level rise, but that would be wetlands technically. So either remove it or define it, I would see happening.
Thank you. We can come back to that. I feel like I have thoughts about it, but I'm trying to stick to questions.
Okay.
Councilmember Bauer.
Yeah, I had a question on groundwater protection at 1.5. And we say, it's about protecting groundwater, but we say require users of septic systems to connect to city services where appropriate and feasible. And we just had a big discussion about leaky laterals, right? I'm just wondering how we can make that something that's more protective, or, something that, like, who decides that really? I mean, we know a poorly maintained septic system, probably a huge water quality problem. I mean, you see them overflowing. I know of one right now, but just wondering how do we want to modify that to make it seem like, it's an important thing, is what I'm saying. So how some better language or.
Right. We added appropriate and feasible because there's Indianola and other locations in the coastal zone that we don't have sewer system extending to. So it's not feasible there to hook up to the sewer system.
Totally. Okay. That makes perfect sense.
But we want to require it unless it's infeasible.
Okay.
Or inappropriate for some reason. We could take inappropriate out. I just thought maybe there's a chance that for some reason it wouldn't be appropriate. But
I forget about Indianola or, those kind of difficult locations. So it totally makes sense. And then 2.10 invasive plant species prohibition, prohibit planting of invasive non-native plants. Think that's great. But how do we do that? How do you even achieve that when we're selling invasive plants in stores still? You buy ivy, you can buy Scotch broom. Maybe that leads me to another topic of like prohibiting the sale of those things, because right now, anybody can do it. So I think it's a great, policy but just wondering, like, is there more language we can put into that?
we brought this to the Planning Commission yesterday, and Commissioner Benson recommended putting in the Humboldt wheat management area list in this policy and the California list of A, B, and C invasive species, so that if somebody reads this policy, they know where to look to find the species. But yeah, there's things outside of this policy and just that need to happen to help deal with selling of invasive plants.
Yeah. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. I'll go ahead. I know it's a report, but we'll still open for public comment. We see any? All right. So I will bring it back. This is just direction. Any final comments? Councilmember Arroyo then Bauer.
I really just wanted to voice that I liked Planning Commissioner Benson's suggestion. I think that's helpful. And, you know, I think we could probably take, or in the future, the council could take a different approach to reaching out to nurseries or banning the sale of certain invasive plants that are on those lists, or something else to kind of, you know, conduct that outreach and require that those not be sold in the city. I don't know if it needs to be in here as much as it would be helpful to reference something that tells you what invasive non-native plants are, because I think a lot of people struggle to differentiate between ornamentals and invasives. So I do think that would be helpful if we're going to have that in there. And then going back to the beneficial reuse, I do think talking a little bit more about what that means, and also perhaps adding some nuance or definition to the aquatic portion could be helpful, because I can imagine instances where we might want to use dredge spoils in shoring up levees, and I'm not sure that would really be considered upland or wetland. So I don't know if like the shoreline environments or some other term would be a good fit, but I do think we want to make it clear that beneficial reuse to replenish beaches and to replenish other structures as needed is good, and we may end up using them to do, like, you know, tidal hummocks. I don't know, and I guess maybe I'm just being picky about words, but my hope is that we would have this framed so that it's really clear and we don't limit ourselves in the future, and that we can lean on this when it comes time to use those dredge spoils. So I know you're more of the coastal act expert than any of us, so I don't know if you have suggestions on how we could tweak that.
Those are all great points, and I think I just need some time to think about it, and to make sure we're not limiting ourselves. We can think that through for you, definitely.
Awesome. Councilmember Bauer.
Now, I was just going to come back to the view impacts. I just concerned looking at, what is that, figure 4.4-3, protected view corridors, you know, the redevelopment of the foot of sea. Like, what does that mean? You know, I mean, I guess it's allowed, but it would require a different level of review. If we were to say we want to put a 3-story building, we're going to impact the views of all those, you know, facilities to the what would be the south. You know, what do you think about that?
It's a view corridor, so it's really just protecting the view down the street to the water. So it won't affect the building heights as long as the buildings are not in that corridor. There was at one time a approval of a hotel there that never happened, and the need to protect the view corridor resulted in them, I think, putting in like a glass walkway or something, you know, so it could make development. It's gonna be something that'll make development harder there. It is a really big space, so but also it's something we've heard from the community that they would like protected through our waterfront specific plan outreach.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other comments or directions, Councilmember Castellano?
Yeah, my question or comments were also around protected views. I'm just imagining, I mean, I'm not adverse to protected views or protected view corridors. I'm imagining that there could be, you know, some kind of innovative designs that would allow for that. Just kind of to understand it better, like if someone, let's say, built something, you know, a building along in that area, and they had, you know, like a second floor that was consistent, but a first floor that had an open area, would that still allow for a view, basically?
Yes, because it's people, you know, walking or driving down the road looking towards the waterfront, so they can continue to see the waterfront. So we wouldn't be worried about second floor.
Right. Okay, cool.
And the previous project the principal planner Kenyon was talking about took that into account, and having the first floor open, and you could have upper floors up to 5 stories right now, is it not?
Yeah, we'll be proposing in the land use section, I think 55 feet.
Yeah, so the upper stories can.
All right, and then Councilmember Arroyo.
This is just a very minor comment, but I love the graphics for attachment 2 for the public access and recreation chapter. It's just that something about the colors or the way that the layers are just pretty hard to see the trails. And so I feel like if there's a way that Senior Planner Topoleski can make that a little bit more visible, that'd be awesome.
Just a clarification on the public access and rec facilities maps or on the bike facilities maps?
Thank you. On the bike facilities map, so specifically the class 1 and 3 trails are just very hard to see, and I do think it might be like the layers of the map graphic itself. They're just I printed them and I've been checking them out online, and it's just I know colors are hard with maps, but they're pretty hard to distinguish. So yes, the bike facilities.
All right, Councilmember Burgell.
I just wanted to share an appreciation with you for including the tribes in this document. I think it's really important. We've seen what happens when the tribes aren't consulted with projects and how they don't go through. And I think that this is really important as far as, you know, in continuing our amends with the tribe and continuing to work with the tribe, these considerations are really critical. So thank you so much.
All right. Do you have enough direction to go?
Yes, thank you for your thoughtful direction.
Excellent. All right. So now we're going to move on to item I2, which is the 2022 water and sewer rate study update. And once again, we will have Deputy Public Works Director Isa.
and water stuff as well, with an update to the rates, water and sewer rates, as well as the impact fees. And we'll talk about those definitions and what they are. So we'll go over some background. So just a history of our rate updates. Water and wastewater funds are what are called enterprise funds. So they operate as a business, meaning the funds that are generated through rate revenue stay within that fund only for uses within that fund. You can't take water rate revenue and spend it on street paving, that sort of thing. Revenues come solely from rates collected from the customers. Utility rates must be commensurate with the cost of service. And no revenue from or subsidy to the general fund, from or to the general fund. And rates were last updated in 2016 for a 5-year period. And the consultant that we're using as our financial consultant on this is NBS. They were selected through a competitive RFP process. They happen to be the same consultants that we used last time, which was actually fairly convenient because they were familiar with the city. They also happen to be the consultant that was used by HCSD last time. And the same consultant they're using this time. If you know about how our water stuff works, we buy water from Humboldt Bay Municipal Water District, and we sell it to HCSD. They also have some of their own sources, but they buy most of their water from us, and their sewer flows to us to our regional treatment plant. So we're intricately tied together. So kind of the concept is they do our rate study first, and then that information passes on to HCSD study, and they work up their additional costs from there. We started the rate study in March of 22, and on October 31st, we sent out what are called the Proposition 218 notices. Proposition 218 requires that when you update a tax, or in this case, water rates are considered to be a tax or fee, you have to send a notice to all of the property owners and all of the ratepayers in the city and give them an opportunity to say no. So they can say no through the filing of a written protest. It's one per parcel, so either the ratepayer or the owner. And if 50% plus one of those people say no, then it doesn't pass, and you go back to the drawing board. So just for some clarification, there will be a public hearing. That noticed a public hearing for December 19th. There will be a public hearing. This is not the public hearing. Any comments, if you want to take public comments tonight, those are not part of the legal public hearing and would need to be submitted into the record at the public hearing. We can take protest letters. We can talk, but in terms of in-depth debate about the mechanics of this or anything related to the public hearing, this is not the public hearing forum. And if the city attorney has anything additional to add on that.
No, thank you. You explained that quite well. I appreciate you doing that.
There we go. Thank you. So why are rate updates necessary? We update them periodically. Every municipality should update their utility rates, and service districts should update their rates periodically to make sure that they're keeping up with inflation and changes in costs. Typically every 5 years is kind of the rate study period. To ensure revenue sufficiency for operations and maintenance improvements and in the capital improvement program. So those are large projects essentially, that you have emergency reserves and debt, and you're meeting all of your legal debt coverage requirements. So for every amount of debt you have to keep a certain amount of money on hand. And so we want to make sure as we're going along that we're doing all of those things. The overall view of the process is development of a financial plan and revenue requirements. So they look at all of our budgets and the money that we've actually spent in all of those line items for staff and insurance and cars and pipes and everything else. And then from that, they figure out what the revenue needs are projected out into the future based on inflation and other factors, capital project needs. They look at what's called a COSA, or a cost of service analysis. So the cost of serving every customer class, and this is true of both water and sewer, all customers are not created the same. A restaurant is not the same as a single family dwelling, and serving both water or sewer to those are not equivalent. So that's why the rates are different for different customer classes. So you go through this cost of service analysis to make sure it's all fair and equitable and that everybody's paying their fair share. And then you go through and design the rates and figure out what kind of a rate structure is going to work for you. So they usually throw out a couple of alternatives, and then you kind of work through that process and come up with what the adopted rates are going to be. So just a little background on the system condition. Most of our system is 100 years old-ish. Take this with a grain of salt, but all of the red was built before 1920. So that gives you an idea of just the magnitude of capital improvements that if we were going to bring everything up to snuff today, how much we'd be looking at. There's a lot of projects there. And that's true of both water and sewer. So going through the COSA, or the cost of service analysis, just a little bit, looking at what are the rates composed of, what goes into the utility rates, and what do people see on their bill. So usually you're going to see a base rate. That's the amount you pay every month on your bill. It doesn't generally change. It's different for every customer class, and it's irrespective of the water use. So no matter how much water you use, the base rate is going to be the same. It's mostly made up of fixed costs, so those things that don't change. The cost of staffing, the cost of insurance, the cost of vehicles and building overhead and everything else that don't vary with the amount of water you produce or the amount of sewage that you treat. That's mostly what goes into your base rate. That's usually where you want most of your revenue to come from because it's incredibly stable. If you have a drastic conservation effort and everybody saves a bunch of water, that's great. But from a revenue standpoint, that's not great because then you have fluctuating revenues over time that may change with seasonal conditions or other things. So the base rate is nice and stable. So you want to get a good amount of revenue from the base rate. The volumetric rate is usually things that are variable with the cost of producing water or treating sewer. So those things are like water purchase, electricity, chemicals, etc., that are actually variable with the cost of the amount of water that you treat. Those are what go into the volumetric rate. And those can vary over time. If people conserve, they're price elastic to a point. If the cost goes up, people will use less. So why are water rates different for different customers? This is kind of a key concept that in doing rate studies for a lot of years, it's good to get your head around. And the basic idea is if you have a big number, and it's like splitting up the check at dinner. If you've got a big bill, and you're splitting it up amongst 12 people, everybody's going to pay a little bit. If you split it up amongst 3 people, everybody's going to pay a lot more. So if you look at something like residential, where the number of accounts in the city that are residential on the water side is 78% of our counts, and the net revenue requirement is a little less than half of the total net revenue requirement, that hit's going to be a little less than if you take the net revenue requirement for commercial, which is 37% of our total revenue requirement, and you divide it up by 12% of the accounts in the city. So what it costs to deliver water or to treat the sewer from an individual customer class is not uniform for the different classes. Sewer from commercial is much higher in strength. A larger meter requires that we provide a greater level of service. If you have a 4-inch meter, that means that you expect if you turn your full 4-inch meter wide open, that you will get every drop of water that meter can produce. And so that requires a greater capacity in the system. The meters are more expensive, the maintenance is more expensive, et cetera, et cetera. So the cost of providing that 4-inch meter is greater than the cost of providing a 3/4-inch meter. So if you divide the number of 4-inch customers, you're going to end up with a bigger number because there's less 4-inch meters and they have a larger capacity for each meter. It's a little complicated. I'm not sure I explained that great, but think about the dinner bill analogy, and I think we'll get there. So just a little bit of comparison between the 5-year period from 2016 to 2022 and the period that we're projecting out, which is 2023 to 2027. This is just for water right now. So our net revenue requirements, based on what we're getting from the rate consultants, are going up by 47%. Of that, O&M expenses are going up 16%, primarily due to increases in water treatment and distribution costs. That includes the cost of purchasing water from Humboldt Bay. So their increases, as we know, went up over time, especially with the mill dropping out. They had some pretty significant increases. Now we do those as a pass-through at this point. And we did over the last 5-year period. So if Humboldt Bay raises their price, we passed that cost increase along separate from the rate study to the consultants. But now that we're in the next 5-year period looking at it, all of those pass-throughs are now cost of doing business. And so the rate study looks at it as like, okay, we're at square one. What's the cost of purchasing water and doing business? And then any additional increases will then be passed through in the next 5-year period. So if the cost of buying water goes up, we'll pass that through in addition to these costs. Capital expenses have gone up by about 140%. That's largely due to the cost of construction and one really large project, which is the water meter AMR replacement project, the automatic meter reading system. All of the water meters have a register on the top. They're a geared system with a register and a transmitter that we drive around and we pick up the radio signal, so we don't have people that go and physically look at the dials anymore. Those were put in 2006, 2007, and the batteries are dying. And they're dying quickly, much more quickly than we thought, and it doesn't look great. They're also much more expensive than they used to be, and part of this is going to be moving to a new type of transmitter. The technology in 20 years, as you might imagine, has advanced to where there's cellular-based technology, and we can go into what that allows you to do. It's much more interactive. It allows customers to have a much more transparent look at what their water usage looks like and manage their own billing to some degree. In the last period, we projected that was going to be about a $3 million project. It's going to be more like a $6 million project, and that's leaving the meters in the ground and just replacing the register and the transmitter. And a lot of that has to do with the way the technology works. The new antennas don't like metal. You go in Costco with your cell phone, it doesn't work very good because it's a big metal building. You put a transmitter in a metal lid, it's not going to work great. And what it'll do is it'll actively manage the signal. If it doesn't talk to the tower, if it talks and the tower doesn't talk back, it'll turn the power up. And it'll keep doing that until the power's at max and the battery life will go down. So we're going to have to replace a lot of lids that we didn't think we were going to have to replace before, because we have a lot of metal lids in the city. So that project right now is sitting at about $6 million. So that's a lot of where that capital improvement project cost comes from. And that is not a negotiable thing. Those meters are dying and they will need to be replaced. We're running into a lot of logistical hurdles with procuring the technology at this point. We're at the mercy of the semiconductor manufacturers. They're like getting cars now. And we're also doing more projects to try to get ahead of the paving that we're doing for Measure H. So it used to be that water and sewer drove the bus and paving kind of came along and paved whatever they could. Well, now there's money for paving, and we're trying to do projects to get ahead of those paving projects. So it's sort of driving a little more on the capital improvement side for both water and sewer. If we're going to pave a street, we want to replace the infrastructure if it's old. We don't want to pave a street and come back 2 years later and cut it up. That doesn't make any sense. So that's a little bit of what's driving sort of the capital improvement cost side of the equation for water. On the sewer side, one of the key concepts that you want to get your head around is this idea of loading. Sewer treatment capacity is based not just on volume, but on concentration. So there's a certain amount of sewage in there and there's a certain amount of water in there. In the summer, sewer that comes to the plant is very concentrated. In the winter, it's very dilute. It's mostly water. So unlike water rates, sewer rates have to take into account the concentration of that effluent as measured in BOD TSS, biological oxygen demand and total suspended solids. It's fancy words, but it basically means how much poop is in there and how much are we going to have to treat. And so sewer accounts are billed differentially based on their strength. The sewer coming out of a residence is not the same as the sewer coming out of an office building, which is not the same as the sewer coming out of a fish processing plant. So they get billed based on the volume. They also get billed based on the strength. And the cost is in the strength. So higher strength effluent, you're going to get billed much more for the same volume. So hopefully that makes sense. So to put it kind of in perspective, the amount of BOD and total suspended solids that the brewery sends down to the plant right now is roughly equivalent, depending on the month, of between 5,000 and 8,500 single-family residences equivalent. So wrap your mind around that a little bit. The idea of strength becomes a very a very important part of this when you look at the cost of service analysis. So one of the things that we're looking to do there is to implement an additional strength tier. Currently, we have low, medium, and high strengths based on the loading. Implementing another strength tier will help incentivize pretreatment, which will free up capacity at the plant. So we can come back. If there are questions about that, I'll come back to it. I realize this is fast, and those are fairly complicated concepts. So the sewer rates are composed much like the water rate of the base rate, which is, again, revenue stable. It's paid every month. It doesn't change with the volume. It's mostly fixed costs. And the volumetric rate, which is made up of costs that vary with treatment volume, it's also dependent on strength. So strength is the other factor there. And this is a similar chart to what we looked at for water. This is how the sewer customers are broken up. As you can see, again, commercial, if 33% of your net revenue requirement is coming from treating the loading that's coming from commercial accounts, and you're going to take that number, 33% of all the money that we're going to bring in through the rate is going to be divided by 10% of the users. Big number divided by a small number is a big number. So that's why commercial rates are high, much higher than residential proportionally. So on the sewer side, things that have changed between the last 5-year period and this 5-year period, the net revenue requirement is up 33%. O&M expenses are at about 1%. So you can see that difference when water was going up fairly substantially. That wasn't in us paying people a lot more, the cost of insurance going up drastically. It's mostly in the cost of water purchase. So sewer is staying fairly static in that regard. Capital expenses on the sewer side up 81%. Not going up as drastically as water because they went up drastically last time. If you remember back to the last rate period, sewer rates went up on the order of 100% over 5 years. That was a big hit. And so because that hit was taken in the last period, I think that's sort of buffering that a little bit this go around. But it does reflect the increased costs of construction and more regulatory requirements. We can get into the specifics of how our permit has changed through the State Water Board and some of the regulations that have been promulgated through EPA and what that does to our costs, as well as a cease and desist order and a consent decree, one that is from several years ago and one that is very recent, and how those are going to affect what the city has to do. Again, that plays into the lateral ordinance and why the city is pushing to replace laterals. Again, it's not an optional thing. We're court order bound to do a lot of these things. The change from an ocean discharge to a bays and estuaries discharge, if you're familiar with how that process has kind of played out, that is very costly. Like not being able to do blending and having to treat every single drop of water that comes to the plant, that's going to be a big expense for us. So not surprising that we're seeing increases on the sewer side. On the impact fees, so these have all kinds of different names. Some places call them capacity fees. Some places call them connection fees. We call them impact fees. This is the slide where I was going to write some stuff that I didn't write. Okay. I must have grabbed either the... It's just some stuff people pay once in a while. So the impact fees are capital projects that have either already occurred in the past or are going to occur in the future, which are designed to accommodate additional growth. So when you build a treatment plant, when they built the treatment plant in 1985, they didn't build it for their needs in 1985. They built it for their future needs. So they spend a bunch of money building something they weren't going to use for many years. And then as all new development comes online and eats up a portion of that capacity that they built, they're going to pay a portion of the costs of providing that capacity. So it's a way of sort of back charging for stuff that was already built and charging new development for that capacity, which they wouldn't be able to build if we didn't have that capacity, or gathering money for future projects that are capacity related. And the definition of what is a capacity related project or not, we can go into, but it's largely has to do with whether it's going to be for future development as opposed to just repairs and maintenance. So the next step, again, this is just an informational, I know I ran through that at light speed, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but this is not the public hearing. So there will be a public hearing on December 19th. That's the one that was noticed. It's in the paper. The Prop 218 protest period will get tallied up at that point. We'll take protests at the meeting. They do have to be in writing. It requires 50% plus one to stop adoption. Adoption of the proposed rates, assuming that there's not a Prop 218 protest sufficient to stop it, would go effective in early January 2023, and then the new rates would get adopted every July after that. So now we'll talk about what the actual proposed rates are, because that's kind of the punchline, right? So on the water side, on the left-hand side of this, you can see the sources of water funds, which are where we get the rate revenues, kind of broken up into different, and this actually gets expanded quite a bit. So this is condensed. So 9.7 million is total sources of funds coming in. Use of water funds, you have water supply and distribution expenses, debt service, and rate funded capital expenses. So as you can see there, the numbers don't quite add up. You're in the negative, and I'll show you a graph that kind of lays that out too. So in fiscal year 23 and on, what they've done is they've adjusted the rates to bring in enough revenue to cover the projected costs. It just turns into math at that point. And so what they've laid out is a 10% increase across the board for the first 4 years, with 8% in the last year, with a cumulative increase of 58% and change. So not an insubstantial amount. And you can kind of see how that balances out. And I think I have a graph in here that will show you. But the key punchline there is 10% a year and a 58% total. Now, you could choose to front load that in some way. You could choose to push it towards the end in some way. And with the sewer last time, we did front load it. They kind of ripped the Band-Aid off and pushed a bunch of that to the front, and then had lower increases in the out years. So that is something that we can discuss. So this kind of lays it out. So the straight line in black is if you didn't do anything, just with the revenues as we are right now, with costs projected to go where they're going, you run out of money. Your bars will exceed the line. Your costs will exceed your revenues. The projected revenues under the proposed rates is the dotted line. So what you're trying to do is get so all the bars are underneath the dotted line, and that's the basic premise of the rate study. That's what they're trying to get. And you can kind of see there what proportion of the total revenue needs are broken out to O&M, debt service, capital expenses, etc. So I can't quite see the top because of the zoom thing, and I don't know how to make the zoom thing go away, but this is your water single family residential bill for an average monthly bill. So the year is in the center is an average of the water of the summer and the winter, because you use less water in the winter generally because people aren't watering their lawn. So in the summer, you're going to use more water. So that's kind of a look at what the bills would be under both the current rates and the proposed. This is just water. Most people don't think about their bill as just water or sewer. They usually think about the whole bill together, and we'll get there. But you can see how the water bill does go up from, let's just use the average in the middle, from $46 to $50. Proposed sewer rates, same basic layout. Cumulative increase is the second line from the bottom, totals out at about 34%, with sort of front-loaded 10%, 8%, and then 4% increases in the out years. Those 4% increases in the out years, the assumption used in the model was 3% inflation across the board. So we didn't use crazy inflation projections given the current inflation environment. Everybody felt hopeful that inflation was transitory in some way, and that we were going to see a return to some fairly normal rates of inflation, which average about 3% over time. So we used 3% inflation for wages and insurance and costs and parts and everything else. So that was across the board. Both water and sewer, we used 3%. So those are basically just inflationary increases in those out years. And I can't see what that says, but this is the same graph essentially for sewer. So again, trying to get everything under the dotted line, and you can see how the total revenue requirements are broken out there between rate funded capital expenses, those are projects, and then O&M and debt service. That's really the only components of where that money goes. So here's a sewer bill. This is an average monthly sewer bill. One thing that is different this go around than the last go around is currently you get 2 free units of sewer. So if you use 6 units of water on your bill, 6 metered units, you're going to pay for 6 units of water. You're going to pay for 4 units of sewer. You get 2 free units. Nobody could explain why you get 2 free units. And the rate study consultants were uncomfortable with the idea, both last time and this time, of not being able to explain why anybody gets 2 free units. And under the laws governing rate studies, they were much more comfortable with the idea of just charge people for what they use, like don't have that 2 free units. So if adopted as proposed, you'll pay for all the sewer. So you'll pay for 6 units. If you use 6 units of water, you pay 6 units of sewer. So here is, I believe this is, oh, I made it go away. I don't know how I did it. So this is a similar look, but this is for multifamily residential. This is a sewer bill comparison of current versus proposed for multifamily, because the rates are different between multifamily and single family. Again, so they're actually going down a little bit. So the question of why would the rates go down? It's a little hard to explain, but again, it has to do with the number of customers and the overall burden of serving the total demand of that number of customers. So commercial, we had some loss of commercial accounts during COVID, and some of those never came back. But the cost of providing service to those meters or to those developments doesn't change as much as the number of accounts does. So again, you have a big number divided by an even smaller number, which is a bigger number. So this is similar logic in the other direction, that if you have more multifamily accounts, you're spreading the burden over more accounts, the overall rate for them comes down a little bit. So this would be an example of commercial light, which is again a strength designation, average monthly bill. You can see it going up. Consumption is on the x-axis, monthly bill on the y-axis. So you can see obviously the more units of water that you use, the higher your bill is going to be. Light sewer is actually billed slightly less than residential because it would be like an office building, right? That one's light as well. I think that's the wrong one. So this is a cumulative graph that this is what most people think about when they get their water and sewer bill, which is what am I going to pay? What's the bottom line here? So you can see how it's broken out with the green being sewer, the blue being water. The first bar on the left there is our current water and sewer rates and the total bill at $109.93. This is for 6 units of water, and they used, gets complicated, but we use what's called winter averaging so that you don't get hit with large sewer bills in the summer. It's a way of accounting for the fact that in the summer people are irrigating and that water is not going down the drain, because we don't meter what goes down the drain. So there's this idea of winter averaging where you take people's winter water consumption and assume that that is their in-home consumption use their winter water consumption and use it for their summer sewer billing. Hopefully that makes sense. It's just a way of accounting for irrigation. So you're not charging people for sewer that they're not putting down the drain. because you don't meter it. So you're making an assumption there. So that's why they're using 600 cubic feet for the water side and 4.7 for the winter averaging. So the overall gist of this is that the bill is going to go up from 109.93 to 160 and 63 cents in 26-27 for that usage for single family residential. So very specific. So not an inconsequential amount. This is the same thing for commercial, and I believe this is for commercial light with an average usage. So the bill's going from 490 to 747. And again, that's because there's less commercial accounts and the burden of serving those accounts doesn't change much. So you divide a number by a smaller number, you get a bigger number. So again, a fairly large increase. So now I've got a blank slide. Apparently my presentation doesn't want to talk about impact fees at all. So that's kind of the overall look at this. I know I covered a lot very quickly, and rates are fairly complicated, so I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Do we have any questions in preparation for the hearing? Councilmember Arroyo?
I don't have a question at this time. I just wanted you to know that I was here.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Castellano?
Sure, I have a question. Just a point of clarification. So, I mean, I understand the idea that, rates need to pay for expenses, and we're kind of mapping it out over 5 years. Many of those expenses will, like new meters, right? They're going to hopefully last 20 years or something like that. I mean, are those rates, like, will the meters specifically be paid for over the next 5 years, or are we kind of anticipating a 20-year cost for those?
It depends on how we want to pay for them. So right now the plan is to pay for them all up front. So either through use of reserves or through rate revenues in those years where we're doing the replacements. It's possible you could bond for that and do it as a debt, but then you're paying insurance on that. So if you have the money to do it, it might be more sensible to do it up front as opposed to bond debt. But the meter project, best case scenario, will happen in a short time frame. They're not going to be replaced over 5 years because they're dying at a fairly logarithmic rate. And so we're going to need to replace them hopefully within a 12-month period.
So I interpreted your question a little bit different, Councilmember Castellano, but after the 5 years, all of the things listed in the capital improvement project will be paid for. It won't be adding to our debt service. So everything that you see in the CIP, which the automated meter readers would be one of those things, at the end of 5 years, all of the things that are listed in the capital improvement project will be paid for during that 5 year period. It won't be paid over another 5 years after that, or 10 or 15.
So we could also go to the state revolving loan fund for that money because it's fairly low interest as opposed to like a bond for something like that. And that really comes down to how the council wants to do it and talks with the finance director about what we have in reserves and how we want to pay for those projects.
Councilmember Bauer?
Well, I would say, I mean, a lot of the stories you hear about, privatization of sewer and water were because of debt obligations, right? Municipalities borrow a bunch of money, realize they can't pay it back. They sell their their critical human services, and then everybody's rates go up astronomically. I mean, you can read a million stories about it. So I think that's important. If we can pay as we go and not take out more debt, I'm in favor of that. I mean, I know it's a bitter pill, right? I mean, services like water and sewer, which we all, take for granted, they're critical to how a community lives. And so if we gotta pay for it, we gotta pay for it, unfortunately. And there's no easy way to do that. But I would not like to assume more debt. I'm sure our finance director would agree on that.
We'll hold that thought till the 19th too.
Yeah.
So we'll make
Yeah.
sure you say it then. And I will go ahead. We have more questions about preparing for the public hearing. All right. Public comment.
Hi. I'm all for infrastructure. We can't end up like Detroit. And like you said, we can't privatize. But all you guys are sitting there talking about the rates, and you're not talking about the fact I noticed that it was public and then it became private. That it was paid for publicly and then it became the private homeowners. Why can't something like this be 50-50? And then you start taxing the wealthy, the people that make over $500,000. Let's be a little fair here, all right? Why does the middle class have to shoulder everything? Why can't you raise the rates on the people who have the money to do it? I agree totally. Like I said, we need the infrastructure, but think outside the box a little bit here, guys. Okay? Let's have some extra taxes for the people who can afford it. And that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Do we have anybody on Zoom who had a comment on this?
Philip?
Yes, thank you again. I'm glad Detroit was brought up. Detroit started its suburbanization 20 to 30 years before the rest of the nation, and it failed a while ago. Higher density occupancy of land in Eureka allows us to minimize the individual cost to our municipal infrastructure maintenance. Most suburban cities, rife with single-family residence buildings since the great suburbanization following World War II, are coming to the same reckoning that we are. I read that clay and galvanized pipe below the ground last 40 to 100 years, depending on conditions. A recent paper about Pasadena that I dug for noted a cost of over $400,000 per mile for sewer infrastructure installation on, quote, virgin land where there was no road and nothing to work around. Obviously, costs would go up as existing infrastructure needs to be cleared or worked around to accommodate replacement, and significantly so. I suggest that if we want cheaper services, we can allow and build higher density housing so costs are spread further. This isn't perfect, as higher density neighborhoods then effectively subsidize lower density ones, but it's a path. The more spread out we are, the more infrastructure we must install. Massive parking lots at box stores and malls creates the linear excess of infrastructure, which adds to citizens' rate costs, and sadly don't add property tax and sales tax value to our citizens' municipality. I might seem off topic. My point is that we are persistently seeing rate increases not because of city mismanagement or graft, but because of the way we are accustomed to living. Spread out, car-dependent areas don't produce the kind of tax value per acre that traditionally developed areas like our Old Town and in some respects Henderson Center do. We must reconsider our preferred growth paradigm and own as citizens that so long as we build wide and mandate large areas for parking and low density per acre development preference, that our city will be saddled with more infrastructure requirements, which means more maintenance costs, which means higher taxes and fees to maintain said infrastructure. I acknowledge the need and I accept the necessary changes, and I urge Council to direct staff to estimate and report market rates for street repair, sewer and water main repair per mile or per lane mile. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised.
None seen.
So I will close public comment on this item, which gets us through the reports and action items. It is 9:15, but we are closing in. Do we want to make a motion to take us till 9:45? Okay, we'll just wait till 9:30. We'll see how quickly we can do this. All right, future agenda items. Does anybody want to add anything? You do.
I would.
What? Yes, yes, Councilmember Royal.
I'd like to do an acknowledgement of the contributions of one of our community members, Mike Bittner, at a future council meeting. I know this is the kind of thing that normally could just come up and be agendized at the beginning under mayor's reports or something, but this is kind of a special one. He did a lot for the city, kind of behind the scenes, and so I just wanted to see if others wanted to find a way to go a little above and beyond to acknowledge him.
I support that.
Okay, I can work with another council member to come up with something. Kim, do you want to work with me on that?
Sure.
Okay. But I didn't see if there were enough nods. I can only see myself. Sorry.
So thumbs up if you're good with this. Okay, we're okay with that. Anything else? Do you want to say, Scott? Okay, then we will move on to the city manager report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Sorry, that was a little loud. So tonight I just wanted to report on our shelter situation. There's been a lot of concern in the community about the weather and where we're at with the weather and where we're at with our shelter space. So I just want to remind Council that we have been under, so I'll go back in history. We used to have what's called an emergency weather shelter that was triggered based on temperature. And when that temperature was hit, we allowed an extra shelter space for that. Approximately in 2017, we signed an agreement with St. Vincent de Paul's, and we kind of changed that structure to more of an emergency overflow shelter. So it wasn't contingent upon weather as to whether or not we added additional beds. And so we're still under this agreement. We just renewed it for another 2 years. What it does is if our shelter space gets full, whether it's a rescue mission, Betty's, wherever the shelter space is, if it's full, Salvation Army will, St. Vincent de Paul's will open up a shelter up to 25 beds to accommodate extra folks. Currently, right now, there's a remodel going on at Eureka Rescue Mission. Their women and children side of the shelter has been full. Typically, the men's side doesn't get full. But right now it is. And so we have made arrangements so that there's a communication between Kristen, I believe, who oversees the women's side of the Eureka Rescue Mission, to get in contact with Bob Santilli and his staff in order to open up more beds. And so right now that is available. It's not contingent upon weather or anything like that. It goes on year-round. Right now we're under an agreement with them for another 2 years. We've triggered it a couple of times, and I'm assuming we'll be triggering it sometime this year too. But it will always be in place, and we'll always have access to that for now. And on the similar topic, by this week, hopefully, we'll have the RFP out for the modular units that will be going down at Hillficker for Betty's project down there, and that'll add an additional 40 spaces for folks as well. So, and we're also working with a couple agencies on Tiny House Village / encampment potential and possibilities. So just wanted to give council an update on that and let the public know that we do have an overflow shelter that's set up. And so when capacity is reached, we do have extra beds available.
Thank you very much. So we will move on now then to our council reports, and we will start with Councilmember Castellano.
Okay. Let's see. I attended the HWMA meeting. I just want to let folks know there will be a special meeting on December 8th. We're starting to look at opening up the JPA to maybe more cities coming in, kind of exciting moment for HWMA. It's, nothing's decided yet, but that's definitely in the conversation. I am co-hosting through, I don't often speak with work, but this definitely has kind of regional import. The Ink people, along with Humboldt Arts Council, are co-hosting a regional arts meeting. And there's a bunch of folks traveling from Sacramento and out of the area to come to it tomorrow from 12 to 4. And then I'm also co-hosting a housing roundtable on Thursday from 4 to almost 6 probably. And then I'll be traveling out of town to the Cal Cities Leadership Policy Meeting in Monterey, November 30th to December 2nd.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Moulton.
Thank you. I was really looking forward to the Recology open house, and I unfortunately missed that one because my house got a cold. Everybody gets a cold at the same time. I did attend the grand opening of the Visitors Center during Arts Alive, and that was very exciting. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot down there, and they're focusing on concierge service. So you're visiting Eureka, you want to know where you can get a falafel, they can help you out. I attended Arts Alive then, which has been really hopping, and I encourage people to shop local, especially in this holiday season. And I wanted to shout out to our local bookstores because list prices on books are what they are. So you can easily get something. If they don't have it in the local store, you can just have them order it for you and get that in time for the holidays. And I'm curious how people are feeling about the street closures. If anybody wants to reach out, I see more people walking around on there. The crowds are getting really big. They're getting lively and cruising around, and still the stores are full of people spilling in and out, looking at art, buying other things. And I'm curious how folks are feeling about that, how it's going with the street closures. And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bauer.
Thank you. Yeah, I attended the Eureka Visitor Center grand opening. That was great. It's a great space, and I think it'll be awesome in the future here. I also attended the RCEA Community Advisory Committee, Cal Cities League Leaders meetings. We've had a couple last week, kind of preparing the new bunch of folks on the leadership for Cal Cities, which represents 487 cities. It's been very cool. I'm also attending the Monterey event, the Cal Cities event here in 2 weeks. Attended the JPA meeting, which is once a month, every 2 weeks, I think. And I have a meeting tomorrow night with the Bridge District folks to just talk about what's going on in the city. And that's it.
Excellent. Councilmember Burgell.
Well, I too wanted to go to Recology, but I too was sick and didn't leave the house all day. I did attend the Veterans celebration, or I guess it was a celebration. Is that what they called it? Honoring veterans who have served down at the Adorney Center, and that was a beautiful event. I really love that event because it honors people in a whole different way. They all of the different forms of military come, and they post the colors, and they talk about they have the different people. It's always so great to see the people from Korea stand up, from people from and I'm going to tell you, there's not very many left, unfortunately, but it's just really great to see people being honored for what they do and how they behave, and not how they behave, but what they do. And I was really thankful this particular year, because many of you know that mental health is a really critical topic for me. And this year, the keynote speaker spoke about veteran suicide, which is a serious problem. As you guys know, my cousin killed himself. He died and killed himself a few weeks ago, and he was a veteran. And it's really it's something that is happening all the time, and we need to get a handle on it. We say we serve, we respect and honor these people, and yet so many fall through the cracks, and it's really critical that we start addressing this on a whole grander scheme. So I was really grateful that he brought that forward and really talked about the importance of that, because it is an important piece. So that was just really great. And Eddie Morgan did a great job. Thank you, Southwest Rotary, for putting that on. I really love that event. And then I did attend a meeting at the Jefferson Community Center. It was a community meeting, and it was really wonderful to listen to them come together. They always have great food, but to come together and to come up with ideas that are going to benefit their area there, you know, and to have really robust conversations about things that are important to them individually. So I really enjoyed that a lot. I always do. And then I too went to the visitor center, and I'm so thankful that we have that opportunity. It's a beautiful little space, really greatly placed, and I really feel like it's going to make a huge impact to have it so close and readily available. So that was really a highlight. Yeah, definitely a highlight. That's enough. Thanks.
Councilmember Arroyo.
Hi. Well, I am currently at the California State Association of Counties meeting, and so I'm in my first first event for my new position, and I'm excited to say that I'll be co-chairing one of the committees on coastal counties. So I'd love to work with those of you who are doing work with Cal Cities around coastal issues. So I'm really excited about that opportunity to work together in a new and different way. Let's see, we had our Humboldt Transit Authority meeting. That's usually the first Wednesday of the month. The unmet transit needs hearing process is happening, but there's not a ton yet to report out about that, but that did happen at our meeting and then at the HTA and HCOG, all of those forums. Let's see. I don't think I had a whole lot else to report. I did finally injure myself in roller derby after 6 years. I finally really did my ankle. So I'm developing a new compassion for people who need accessible ways to get around, because I'm hobbling around with a cast and an e-scooter. So anyway, I will be a little slowed down by that, and for that reason I was unable to participate in the Veterans Day event as well. I was just in a lot of pain. I've had several conversations in the last week or so. I think Councilmember Burgell and I often get asked to tell the story of what happened with the transfer of Tuluwat, and I always like to be able to share some thoughts on that and some backstory and some lessons learned. So I've been doing a bit more of that lately. And let's see, I had one or two other things to add, but I'll skip them because I didn't write them down. So thank you for to our staff for putting together that event at Recology. And big thanks to those who put on the Veterans Day event. I know that's always a really meaningful event in Eureka.
Thank you very much. Before we close, Councilmember Moulton reminded me there's a lot of stuff going on in Old Town for the holidays. So lots of opportunities to shop local. If you go online and look for the list of events, it starts like next week and it starts this Friday. And there are things happening constantly. So be sure to get out and enjoy that. And then I just wanted to close by saying today's meeting to me, there are a lot of things that we do that in council meetings and, variety of excitement. But this is such important stuff. I just felt like today was super meaty and hard. And sometimes we have to do hard stuff, but all in the effort to make people feel normal, right, Brian? So thank you all for all your hard work, and we will see you in a couple weeks.